Welcome, friend. Before the night fully settles in, before your thoughts begin to slow on their own, allow yourself to arrive gently in this moment. There is nowhere you need to go, nothing you need to solve, nothing you need to remember or prepare for. This time is not asking anything from you. As you listen, you may notice the weight of the day still resting in your body. Perhaps it lingers in your shoulders, your jaw, or behind your eyes. There is no need to change that. Simply notice it the way you might notice the warmth of a blanket or the quiet hum of a distant sound. Let your breathing find its own rhythm, in and out, no effort, no correction. If your mind feels busy, that is all right. If it feels tired, that is all right too. This is not a space that requires clarity. It only asks for presence. Long ago, before words were written and stories were recorded, people understood rest differently. They did not chase it. They did not demand it. Rest was something that arrived naturally when the body felt safe and the mind no longer needed to stay alert. Tonight, you are invited back into that understanding. Imagine a quiet place far from urgency and noise. A place where the air is soft and the light is low. Nothing there moves quickly. Even time seems to slow, as if it has decided to pause alongside you. You are not watching this place, you are already within it. Each sound you hear becomes part of the stillness. Each breath carries you deeper into ease. There is no moment you need to hold on to. Each one can pass freely without resistance. Thoughts may appear. You do not need to follow them. You do not need to push them away. Let them drift the way clouds move across a night sky, present yet ungraspable. There is no mistake happening here. If you notice yourself listening closely, gently soften that attention. You do not need to focus. You only need to allow the sound of this voice to move through you like a slow current beneath the surface of a calm lake. Nothing is being asked of you except rest. Some people believe rest must be earned, that it comes only after effort, after understanding, after completion. But rest is not a reward. It is a natural state the body remembers when it feels safe enough to return. Tonight, safety comes not from certainty, but from letting go of the need for it. You may notice moments where your awareness fades slightly, moments where words become less distinct. That is not something to correct. That is the body beginning to soften its grip. If you find yourself drifting, allow it. If you find yourself awake, allow that too. There is no wrong way to be here. As the night deepens, stories will unfold gently one after another. They are not meant to teach or persuade. They are not meant to be remembered in detail. They are simply offerings, quiet reflections that mirror parts of the human experience we all carry. You do not need to listen closely to understand them. You do not need to stay awake to receive them. Let them pass through you the way a lullaby once did. Familiar, calming, and soon forgotten, yet deeply felt. For now, rest in this beginning. Let the day loosen its hold. Let the future wait. Let the mind set down what it has been carrying. In this space, nothing is unfinished. Nothing is missing. Nothing is required. There is only the gentle movement toward rest, and that is enough. In the early hours of evening, when daylight begins to loosen its grip, a monastery bell once echoed across a quiet valley. It was not a loud sound. It did not demand attention. It did not hurry anyone. The bell rang only once. Those who heard it did not stop what they were doing. Farmers continued walking home. Birds remained perched in the trees. Even the wind seemed unchanged. And yet, something subtle shifted in the air as if the world itself had taken a deeper breath. Inside the monastery lived an old monk named Dogen. He had rung that bell every evening for as long as anyone could remember. Not to announce prayer, not to mark time, simply to remind the valley that the day was ending, whether anyone noticed or not. One evening, a young traveler arrived at the edge of the valley, just as the bell sounded. He paused mid-step. He could not explain why. The sound affected him so deeply. It carried no command, no message, and yet his shoulders relaxed in a way they had not for a very long time. He followed the sound until he reached the monastery gates. The traveler had been walking for many months. He carried little with him, but inside his mind was crowded. Thoughts overlapped. Memories repeated themselves. Questions returned again and again unanswered. He believed that if he kept moving, the noise inside him would eventually fade. It had not. When he entered the monastery courtyard, he expected to be questioned. Instead, he was greeted by silence and the faint scent of incense drifting through the air. Dogen was sitting nearby repairing a small crack in a stone path. The monk looked up, met the traveler's eyes and gave a small nod. "You may stay," Dogen said gently. "The bell has already spoken for the day." The traveler did not understand the words, but he felt something settle inside him. That night, after a simple meal eaten without conversation, the traveler lay awake on a thin mat in a small room. Moonlight spilled across the floor in pale lines. His body was tired. His mind was not. Thoughts arrived one after another, each one asking for attention. He tried to follow his breath. He tried to clear his mind. He tried to force rest. Nothing worked. Eventually he rose and stepped back into the courtyard. Dogen was there again. This time he was standing near the bell, his hand resting lightly on the rope as though he were listening to something no one else could hear. "Why does the bell ring only once?" the traveler asked. Dogen turned slowly. "If it rang many times," he replied, "people would wait for it to stop." The traveler frowned. "And once Dogen said is enough." The monk gestured for the traveler to sit. They sat together in the quiet. "Tell me," Dogen said softly, "what are you listening for when you try to sleep?" The traveler hesitated. "I think I'm listening for silence," he said. Dogen smiled. "Then you are listening too hard." Dogen reached down and picked up a small wooden bowl, resting near the bell. He tapped it gently. The sound was brief, light, and gone almost immediately. "Did you hear it?" Dogen asked. "Yes." "Where is it now?" The traveler paused. "It's gone." Dogen nodded. "Did it need to stay?" The question lingered in the air. "Your thoughts are like that sound," Dogen continued. "They appear and they pass, but when you ask them to stay silent, you give them importance." The traveler looked down at his hands. "I don't know how to stop listening to them," he said. "You don't stop listening?" Dogen replied. "You stop waiting." The words were simple, but something about them felt unfamiliar. "When you wait for silence," Dogen continued, "you create tension. When you allow sound, silence follows on its own." The monk stood and gently rang the bell once more. The sound moved outward, then disappeared into the valley. "Notice," Dogen said quietly, how the silence did not arrive before the bell. It arrived after. The traveler felt his breathing slow. For the first time that night, he did not feel the urge to solve anything. They sat together until the air grew cooler. When the traveler returned to his room, the moon had shifted higher in the sky. His thoughts were still present, but they felt less demanding, less urgent. He lay down without expectation, without effort. Sleep did not come immediately. But for the first time in many nights, he did not wait for it. And eventually, without being summoned, rest arrived on its own. Morning arrived without announcement. There was no bell this time, no sound to mark the beginning of the day. Light entered the room quietly, spreading across the floor and resting on the traveler's closed eyes. He woke slowly, as if rising from deep water, unsure at first whether he had truly slept or simply drifted in a long, gentle pause. His body felt different, not energized, not renewed, just softer. He remained still for a while, listening to the distant sounds of the monastery waking on its own. Footsteps on stone, the quiet splash of water being poured, the low murmur of wind moving through trees beyond the walls. His thoughts had not vanished, but they no longer pressed against him. They moved at a distance now, like echoes, rather than voices. When he stepped outside, Dogen was already in the courtyard, carefully wiping dust from the bell with a simple cloth. His movements were slow, deliberate, as though each one belonged exactly where it was. "You slept," Dogen said without turning around. The traveler nodded. "I think I did." "That is enough," the monk replied. They walked together toward the edge of the courtyard, where a narrow path led down into the valley. Morning mist hovered low, blurring the outlines of the land. "Last night," the traveler said, "I didn't try to sleep. I just waited for nothing." Dogen stopped and looked at him. "That is why rest came," he said. "You were no longer standing in its way." The traveler frowned slightly. "I've spent so much time trying to fix my mind, trying to quiet it, trying to make it behave." Dogen smiled faintly. "A mind that is treated like a problem will always feel like one." They sat on a stone bench near the bell. "When you hear the bell," Dogen continued, "do you chase the sound? No. Do you ask it to stay longer? No. Then why do you chase your thoughts?" the monk asked gently. The traveler had no answer. Later that morning, Dogen invited the traveler to walk with him beyond the monastery grounds. They followed a narrow trail that wound through tall grass and descended toward a small clearing, where a single tree stood alone. Beneath it, a wooden bench faced the open valley. They sat. "Tell me," Dogen said, "what do you believe keeps you awake at night?" The traveler thought carefully. "I think it's the feeling that I'm falling behind," he said, "that if I stop thinking, something will be missed. Forgotten, lost." Dogen nodded slowly. "Many people believe thinking is what keeps them safe," he said. "They confuse vigilance with care." He gestured toward the valley below. "Look," he said. The traveler followed his gaze. A flock of birds moved across the sky, uncoordinated yet somehow aligned. "Do they plan each movement?" Dogen asked. "Number. Do they worry about where the wind will take them? I don't think so." And yet Dogen said they arrive. The monk rested his hands on his knees. "Rest is not neglect," he said. "It is trust." The traveler felt those words settle slowly within him. That afternoon, the traveler remained alone beneath the tree. He noticed how often his mind reached outward, searching for the next thought, the next concern. Each time it did, he gently returned his attention to the feeling of the bench beneath him, the warmth of the sun on his face, the movement of air across his skin. Nothing dramatic happened. There were no revelations, and yet something was loosening. When evening came, the traveler returned to the monastery. The bell rang once more. This time he did not stop to listen. The sound passed through him naturally like a breath. That night, sleep came again. Not perfectly, not deeply, but without resistance. He woke once in the middle of the night, a familiar worry surfacing briefly. Instead of engaging it, he noticed the space around it, the quiet, the darkness, the steady rhythm of his breath. The worry faded on its own. By morning, he understood something subtle. The bell had never been calling him to attention. It had been reminding him that attention was not required. Some things end on their own. Some things begin the same way. And rest, he realized, was one of them. As the day unfolded, the traveler prepared to leave the monastery. He thanked Dogen with a deep bow. "I don't know if I'll remember this," he said honestly. Dogen nodded. "You don't need to." He placed a hand lightly on the bell rope. "When the mind grows loud," he said, "listen for what follows the sound." The traveler bowed again and began walking down the path into the valley. Behind him, the bell remained silent, and yet the quiet followed him all the same. The night continued its slow movement forward. The sound of the bell faded into memory, but the feeling it left behind remained. A quiet spaciousness, a sense that nothing needed to be resolved before rest could arrive. As the traveler moved on from the valley, that understanding traveled with him, not as a lesson to remember, but as a gentle background presence, like a familiar rhythm beneath his steps. And in time, that rhythm led him somewhere new. Beyond the valley, the road narrowed and curved toward a small monastery garden, tucked between low hills. Unlike the quiet stone walls of the previous place, this monastery felt alive with subtle movement. Leaves shifted constantly in the wind. Water trickled through narrow channels cut into the earth. Even the air seemed to wander freely. The garden was tended by a monk named Tenzin. He was not old, but his movements carried an ease that made time feel irrelevant around him. Each morning, he walked the same paths, tending to plants that did not belong to him and would outlive him. The traveler arrived just as Tenzin was kneeling beside a patch of soil, gently removing weeds with his bare hands. "You're welcome to sit," Tenzin said without looking up. "The garden doesn't mind company." The traveler sat on a low stone nearby, watching quietly. For a while, neither of them spoke. The sound of water moving through the garden filled the space between them. It did not rush. It did not pause. It simply followed its path. Eventually, the traveler spoke. "I don't understand why my mind becomes busiest when I try to rest," he said. "It's as if stillness invites everything I've been avoiding." Tenzin smiled, still focused on the soil. "That is because stillness removes distraction," he said, "and what remains finally has room to appear." The traveler frowned slightly. "Then how do I rest without being overwhelmed?" Tenzin brushed dirt from his hands and sat back on his heels. "Tell me," he said, "have you ever tried to quiet this garden?" The traveler looked around. "There's always movement," he said. "Leaves fall, water flows, insects move through the soil." "Exactly," Tenzin replied. "If I tried to stop the garden from moving, it would die." He stood and gestured for the traveler to follow him along a narrow path. Many people believe rest means removing all activity. Tenzin continued, but true rest allows natural movement without interference. They stopped beside a small pool where water collected before continuing its journey through the garden. "Look," Tenzin said. "The water does not ask where it has been. It does not worry about where it will go next. It rests by moving." The traveler watched the surface of the pool ripple gently. "My thoughts don't feel that gentle," he said. Tenzin nodded. "That is because you try to control them instead of observing them." He picked up a fallen leaf and placed it on the water. It floated briefly, then drifted onward. "You don't need to push the leaf away," Tenzin said. "And you don't need to hold it still. You only need to let the water do what it already knows how to do." The traveler felt a familiar quiet settle in his chest. That evening, as the light softened and shadows stretched across the garden, he remained there watching movement happen without instruction. And, for the first time in a long while, he wondered if rest was not something that arrived after movement stopped, but something that existed within it all along. Night settled gently over the garden. Lanterns were lit one by one, their glow reflected softly in the narrow channels of water that wove through the soil. The air cooled, carrying the scent of earth and leaves. Nothing announced the arrival of darkness. It simply arrived the way breath turns into sleep without instruction. The traveler remained in the garden long after the work of the day had ended. Tenzin moved slowly among the plants, straightening a fallen stem here, brushing soil from a stone there. There was no urgency in his movements, no sense that anything needed to be completed before rest could begin. "You work even as the day ends," the traveler observed. Tenzin smiled gently. "The garden does not separate effort from rest," he said. "It only responds to what is needed." They sat together near the pool once more, listening to the steady sound of water flowing through the channels. "When you try to sleep," Tenzin asked, "what do you usually do?" The traveler thought for a moment. "I try to quiet my mind," he said. "I tell myself to relax. I focus on breathing. Sometimes I count. Sometimes I repeat words." "And does it help?" Tenzin asked. Sometimes, the traveler admitted, but often it feels like more work. Tenzin nodded. "That is because effort, even gentle effort, keeps the mind awake." He reached down and touched the surface of the water with his fingertips. Small ripples spread outward, then disappeared. "Sleep is not something you create," he said. "It is something you allow." The traveler watched the water until it became still again. "But what about the thoughts that come uninvited?" he asked. "The ones that arrive without warning." Tenzin withdrew his hand. "They are already present long before you notice them," he said. "Rest does not come from stopping them. It comes from no longer following them." The words felt familiar yet deeper now. Later that night, the traveler lay on a simple mat near the edge of the garden. The sounds of the monastery faded. Gradually, footsteps growing, distant voices, dissolving into silence. Above him, leaves shifted gently in the night breeze. A thought appeared, then another. He noticed them just as he had learned before, but this time he noticed something else as well. Between each thought there was space, not empty space, living space. He did not try to widen it. He did not try to hold it. He simply rested within it. The water continued to flow through the garden. The leaves continued to move. His breath continued its quiet rhythm. And without realizing when it happened, he drifted into sleep. When morning came, the traveler woke with the sound of water nearby. Tenzin was already awake, adjusting one of the channels where soil had shifted overnight. "You slept," Tenzin said softly without looking up. "Yes," the traveler replied, even though my mind was not completely quiet. Tenzin smiled. "Then you have learned something important." The traveler sat up slowly. "That rest doesn't require silence," he said. "And silence doesn't require effort," Tenzin added. They shared a quiet moment, watching sunlight touch the garden once more. As the traveler prepared to leave, he felt no pressure to carry the lesson with him. It was already moving naturally, like water finding its way downhill. He bowed to Tenzin and stepped back onto the road. Behind him, the garden continued its gentle movement, and within him, rest no longer waited for stillness. It moved with him. The road unfolded quietly ahead of the traveler. The garden faded behind him, but the sound of moving water seemed to remain echoing softly in his awareness. His steps felt lighter now, not because the path was easier, but because he was no longer carrying each moment forward with him. He walked without counting the distance, without measuring progress. And in that unmeasured space, another story began to take shape. At the edge of a forest where tall trees filtered the light into soft, shifting patterns, the traveler encountered a small hut made of rough wood and stone. Smoke rose gently from its roof, thin and unhurried. Outside the hut sat a monk named Ryokan. He was known in nearby villages not for sermons or teachings, but for his quiet presence. People said he lived with nothing, yet seemed to lack nothing at all. When the traveler approached, Ryokan was sitting cross-legged on the ground, repairing an old robe with careful, uneven stitches. "You may sit," Ryokan said, without looking up. "The ground does not mind." The traveler sat nearby, resting his pack beside him. For a long while, neither spoke. The forest moved around them. Leaves fell, branches swayed. Somewhere deeper within the trees, a bird called out and then fell silent again. Finally, the traveler spoke. "I've been learning how to rest," he said. "But sometimes I feel afraid of what happens when I let my guard down." Ryokan paused his stitching and looked up. "Afraid of what?" he asked, gently. The traveler searched for the right words. "Afraid that something will be taken," he said, "or that I'll lose control." Ryokan smiled softly. "Come," he said, standing slowly. "Let me show you something." They walked a short distance into the forest where the trees grew closer together and the light dimmed naturally. Ryokan stopped beside a fallen log. "Sit here," he said. They sat. "Tell me," Ryokan continued, "when you sleep, do you guard your dreams?" The traveler shook his head. "No, yet you still wake up," Ryokan said. "Still breathing, still whole." The traveler felt a quiet recognition stir inside him. Ryokan reached into his robe and removed a small cloth bundle. He opened it, revealing a single piece of bread. "This is all I have," he said calmly. Without warning, Ryokan placed the bread on the log and stepped back. "If someone takes it," he said, "I will eat later. If no one takes it, I will eat now." The traveler watched, unsure what to say. A moment passed, then another. No one came. Ryokan picked up the bread and broke it in half, offering a piece to the traveler. Fear, Ryokan said quietly, comes from believing we must always be ready. They ate in silence. As evening approached, the forest grew darker, cooler. The traveler noticed his thoughts begin to stir again, gently at first, then more insistently. Old habits returned, whispering caution. Ryokan seemed to sense this. Rest does not make you vulnerable, he said. It reminds you that you already are and that this has always been true. The words settled slowly. That night the traveler rested near the hut. The forest sounds surrounded him, alive, yet not demanding. A thought appeared, then another. He noticed them without reaching for them. He did not ask them to leave. He did not ask them to stay. And as the darkness deepened, his body remembered what to do. Sleep arrived quietly, like a visitor who had never truly left. Morning in the forest did not arrive all at once. Light filtered slowly through the trees, touching the ground in quiet patches. The air was cool and still, carrying the scent of damp earth and leaves. The traveler woke without urgency, unsure how long he had slept, and realized that it no longer mattered. Ryokan was already awake. He sat outside the hut, sweeping fallen leaves into a small pile, though more leaves continued to fall as he worked. There was no sign of frustration in his movements, only patience. You clean even though the forest will cover it again, the traveler observed. Ryokan smiled. Yes, he said, and the forest does not feel insulted. They shared a simple meal in silence. The traveler noticed how Ryokan ate slowly without distraction. Each movement felt complete, as if there were nothing else waiting beyond the moment. I think I understand what you showed me last night, the traveler said finally. But fear still returns. Ryokan nodded. Of course it does. He set his bowl aside. Fear is not a mistake, he said. It is a habit. The traveler listened closely. When you have lived a long time, believing you must hold everything tightly, Ryokan continued, your hands do not open easily, not at first. He reached out and gently opened his own palm. You do not force the hand open, he said. You wait until it is ready. The traveler looked down at his own hands resting loosely in his lap. So, rest is like that, he asked. Waiting instead of forcing, yes, Ryokan replied. Rest is patience with yourself. Later, as they walked together along a narrow forest path, the traveler noticed something else. The forest was full of sounds, branches creaking, insects moving, distant calls echoing through the trees. And yet none of it felt overwhelming. At night, the traveler said, my thoughts feel louder than this forest. Ryokan stopped and turned toward him. That is because you listen to them alone, he said. He placed a hand lightly against the trunk of a nearby tree. This tree does not listen to its own creaking, he continued. It is part of something larger. The traveler rested his hand against the bark as well, feeling its rough texture, its steadiness. You are not required to face the night alone, Ryokan said softly, even when no one else is present. The words carried a quiet comfort. When it was time to leave, the traveler bowed deeply. I don't know how long this calm will last, he admitted. Ryokan returned the bow. It does not need to last, he said. You only need to remember that it is possible. The traveler stepped back onto the road, the forest closing gently behind him. That night, as darkness gathered once more, fear appeared briefly at the edge of his awareness. he noticed it. He did not argue with it. He did not prepare for it. He let it sit and then move on. Sleep came not because fear was gone, but because he no longer believed it needed his attention. The forest slowly released its hold as the traveler moved onward. The air felt different now, lighter, more open. Each step carried less weight than before, not because his journey was ending, but because he no longer believed he had to carry everything with him. What he had learned did not stay behind with the trees. It moved quietly within him, settling wherever there was space. And in that space, another encounter waited. Near the outskirts of a busy town, the traveler came across a small tea house tucked away from the main road. It was easy to miss. Its wooden sign was faded and its doorway stood slightly open as if undecided about welcoming guests. Inside sat a monk named Hoshin. He was already pouring tea, though no one else was there. Steam rose slowly from the cup, curling into the air before disappearing. The traveler paused at the entrance. "You may come in," Hoshin said without looking up. "The tea is already being poured." The traveler stepped inside and sat across from him. For a moment, neither spoke. Hoshin lifted the teapot and continued pouring even as the cup filled and overflowed. Tea spilled gently onto the table, then onto the floor, spreading without urgency. The traveler watched confused. "The cup is full," he said carefully. Hoshin nodded. "Yes, and yet you keep pouring." "Yes," Hoshin replied again. The traveler waited, unsure what was expected of him. Finally, Hoshin set the teapot down. "Tell me," he said calmly, "how do you expect rest to enter when you are already full?" The question landed softly, but it stayed. The traveler looked at the cup, then at his own hands. "I don't know how to empty myself," he admitted. Hoshin smiled gently. "Good," he said. "Then there is still space to begin." They sat together as Hoshin cleaned the spilled tea without haste. "Most people believe exhaustion comes from doing too much," Hoshin said. "But often it comes from holding too much." He placed an empty cup in front of the traveler. "Rest does not arrive when you add something new," he continued. "It arrives when you stop pouring." The traveler wrapped his hands around the empty cup. It was warm but light. That evening, as the town quieted and the tea house dimmed, the traveler remained there, noticing how often his mind reached to fill the silence with thought. Each time it did, he imagined the overflowing cup, and slowly, without instruction, he allowed it to remain empty. That night, sleep came gently, not because his mind was clear, but because it had finally made room. The tea house grew quiet as evening settled. The warmth of the empty cup lingered in the traveler's hands even after he set it down. He stepped back onto the road with less urgency than before, noticing how the town's sounds softened as distance grew. What he carried now was not instruction, but space and openness that did not ask to be filled. And in that openness, another meeting unfolded. At the edge of a market road where merchants gathered beneath woven awnings, the traveler noticed a man sitting alone beside a small chest. The chest was finely carved and bound with a thin golden chain that caught the light whenever the man shifted. The man's name was Tenzin, a merchant known for his success. He wore simple clothing, but his posture was guarded. One hand rested constantly on the chest as though it might disappear if he looked away. The traveler paused nearby, watching as people passed. Some glanced at the chest with curiosity. Others ignored it completely. "You're welcome to sit," the merchant said. His eyes never leaving the lock, the traveler sat. "What do you carry?" the traveler asked gently. The merchant hesitated, then answered, "Everything I've earned." The words were spoken with pride and with strain. "Does it bring you rest?" the traveler asked. The merchant laughed softly. "It should." He tightened his grip on the chain. "I worked for many years," he continued. "I planned carefully. I protected what was mine. And yet when night comes, my mind refuses to sleep." The traveler watched the merchant's hand. "Why?" he asked. The merchant finally looked up. "Because if I loosen my hold even for a moment, I'm afraid it will all be gone." They sat in silence as the market slowly emptied. When darkness fell, the merchant prepared to leave, lifting the chest with visible effort. His shoulders tensed. His breath grew shallow. "May I ask you something?" the traveler said. The merchant nodded. "If you set the chest down for the night," the traveler asked, "would it stop being yours?" The merchant froze. He looked at the chest, at the chain, at his own hands. "I don't know," he admitted. The traveler did not press further. That night, the merchant lay awake beside the chest, listening to the distant sounds of the road. Each thought returned to the same question. What happens if I let go? Sleep did not come easily. But for the first time, the question did not demand an answer. Morning arrived quietly along the market road. The stalls were still closed. The awnings hung loose, unmoving in the early light. The merchant woke with the same familiar tension in his chest, his hand still resting on the golden chain as though it had never left it. He had slept only in fragments. Each time his body softened, a thought pulled him back. Images of loss, of theft, of effort wasted. And yet something from the night before lingered beneath those thoughts like a question that refused to be silenced. Would it stop being mine if I let go? The merchant sat up slowly. Across the road, the traveler was already awake, seated on a low stone, watching the light shift across the ground. "You didn't sleep," the traveler said gently. The merchant shook his head. "I tried. That is often the problem," the traveler replied without judgment. They sat together as the road began to stir. "I've spent years protecting this," the merchant said, placing his hand on the chest. "I believed that if I relaxed even once, everything would fall apart." The traveler nodded. "And has holding it brought you peace?" The merchant did not answer immediately. He looked at the chest again, at the careful carvings. At the lock he checked again and again, even when no one was near. "No," he said quietly. The word surprised him as it left his mouth. The traveler remained silent. After a long moment, the merchant stood and did something he had not done in years. He set the chest down, not carefully, not defensively. He simply placed it on the ground and stepped back. His breath caught. Nothing happened. The chest remained where it was. The world did not collapse. The road did not rush in to take it. The merchant stood there, unsure how to feel. "I didn't lose it," he said softly. The traveler smiled faintly. "You never needed to guard it with your whole body." The merchant exhaled a long breath he did not realize he had been holding. That night, when darkness returned, the merchant lay beside the chest once more. But this time his hand did not reach for the chain. Thoughts still came. Habit returned. But the urgency was gone. He remembered the feeling of setting the chest down, the weight leaving his shoulders, the ground holding what he did not need to carry through the night. Sleep came slowly, but it came. And when morning arrived again, the merchant woke with something unfamiliar resting in his chest. Not certainty, not control, relief. The traveler rose before the road, fully awakened. He bowed lightly to the merchant. "I don't know if I can always let go," the merchant said. "You don't have to," the traveler replied. "Only enough to rest." As the traveler walked on, the merchant remained by the road, his chest beside him, untouched. For the first time, it felt lighter. Not because it held less, but because it no longer held him. The road carried the traveler onward once more. Behind him, the market sounds slowly dissolved into distance. Ahead, the path narrowed and curved toward a quieter stretch of land, where fewer people passed and the world seemed less concerned with possession or progress. Each step felt unhurried, guided not by destination, but by readiness. And along that quieter road, another lesson waited, one that could not be owned, repaired, or protected. At the edge of a small village just beyond the last line of houses stood a modest tea hut. It leaned slightly to one side as though it had grown tired of standing perfectly straight. The roof was uneven. One wooden beam bore a long visible crack that had been there for many years. And yet the hut remained standing, quiet and patient, welcoming anyone who came without asking why. Inside lived an elderly monk named Riku. He was not known for long teachings or careful explanations. People spoke of him only in passing, saying that time seemed to slow around him and that sitting in his presence felt strangely restful, even without conversation. When the traveler entered the hut, Riku was rinsing a single teacup. It was the only one he owned. The cup was chipped along the rim, its surface worn smooth by years of use. Riku held it carefully, not out of fear but out of familiarity, as though he knew its weight and shape as well as his own hands. "You may sit," Riku said gently, setting the cup down. "The tea is simple, but it is enough." The traveler sat across from him, noticing how quiet the space felt. Not silent, just unburdened. The walls did not try to impress. The objects inside did not compete for attention. Everything seemed to rest exactly where it belonged. Riku poured the tea slowly. Steam rose, then disappeared. The traveler watched the chipped rim of the cup. "Doesn't it bother you?" he asked softly. "That it's broken?" Riku smiled faintly. "It has already been broken," he said. "I only remember that when it happens again." The words landed gently, without instruction. The traveler wrapped his hands around his own cup. It was warm, solid, temporary. At night, he said after a pause, "My mind fills with thoughts about what might break, what might be lost. I try to hold everything together even when my body is exhausted." Riku nodded. "Yes," he said, "most people do." He lifted his cup and took a small sip unhurried. "We suffer twice," Riku continued. "Once in imagination, and once when something actually happens." He placed the cup back on the table. "This cup," he said, tapping it lightly with one finger, "will fall one day. It will shatter. That is not a tragedy. It is simply its nature." The traveler felt his shoulders soften slightly, and when it breaks, he asked. Riku smiled again. "Then I will sweep the floor." Nothing more was added. Nothing needed to be. That evening, the traveler stayed in the hut. As night settled, the village sounds faded. Footsteps grew rare. Voices dissolved into distance. The hut seemed to exhale, releasing the day without effort. The traveler lay down on a simple mat near the wall. The crack in the wooden beam caught his eye. It did not look weak, it looked honest. Thoughts arrived as they always did. Images of loss, memories of endings, quiet fears about things slipping from his grasp. Normally, these thoughts would tighten his chest, pulling him into vigilance. But now they felt different. He remembered the cup. Already broken, already complete. He noticed how each thought appeared, lingered briefly, then shifted into something else. None of them stayed long enough to be protected. None of them asked to be fixed. His breathing slowed. The mat supported his weight. The floor held the hut. The hut stood cracked but steady. He did not try to push the thoughts away. He did not try to follow them. He allowed them to pass the way. One allows a sound in the distance to fade on its own. Gradually, the tension he had been carrying through countless nights loosened. Sleep came quietly. Not because nothing could break, not because loss had been resolved, but because nothing needed to be protected from its nature. When morning came, light filtered softly through the hut. Riku was awake, rinsing the same cup again, his movements unhurried and familiar. "You slept," he said without surprise. "Yes," the traveler replied. "Even though my thoughts were still there." Riku nodded. "Thoughts do not prevent rest," he said. "Fear does." The traveler sat quietly, feeling the truth of that settle into his body rather than his mind. As he prepared to leave, he looked once more at the chipped cup at the cracked beam at the hut that stood without apology. He bowed deeply. Outside, the road waited, and as he stepped back into the day, he carried with him a quiet understanding. Rest does not come from keeping everything intact. It comes from knowing that even when things break, the ground beneath you still remains. The tea hut remained quiet as night deepened. The warmth of the cup, the crack in the wood, the simple acceptance in Riku's words followed the traveler as he stepped back onto the road. Nothing about the path had changed, and yet the way he carried himself had softened as if he no longer needed to guard each moment against what might come. With each step, the understanding settled more deeply. Some things are already broken. Some things are already complete. And knowing this allows the body to rest. The road continued. Beyond the village, the land opened into wide, pale fields. The soil was dry and cracked, broken into uneven patterns by weeks without rain. The air felt heavier here, as though the sun had lingered too long, pressing its warmth into the earth without relief. Nothing moved quickly. Even the wind passed through, reluctantly stirring dust instead of coolness. At the center of one such field worked two figures, an old farmer named Lao Jiang and his son, Chen. They had tended this land for many years, not with hope that demanded reward, but with steady care, shaped by routine. Each season they prepared the soil. Each season they planted, and each season they waited. But this year the waiting had stretched on too long. The rain had not come. The traveler arrived near dusk when the heat finally began to loosen its grip. Lao Jiang noticed him first and raised a hand in quiet greeting. "You may rest here," he said. "The ground is hard, but it will hold you." The traveler thanked him and sat at the edge of the field, watching father and son finish their work. Chen's movements were tight. Each step carried frustration. Each glance toward the sky held expectation that had gone unanswered too many times. That night, as darkness settled and the land cooled slightly, they gathered near the field's edge. The sky was clear, too clear. Chen lay awake, staring upward. "I don't understand," he said quietly. "We did everything right. We prepared carefully, we worked without complaint, and still nothing comes." Lao Jiang did not answer immediately. The traveler listened as the silence stretched. "I keep telling myself," Chen continued, "that if I stay alert, if I worry enough, I'll be ready. That maybe I can prevent what's coming." His voice carried exhaustion more than anger. Lao Jiang finally spoke. "You believe your worry is doing something," he said calmly. Chen turned toward him. "At least it keeps me from being careless." Lao Jiang shook his head slightly. "Care and worry are not the same," he said. The words settled into the night air. The traveler lay nearby, listening. Crickets moved through the grass. The wind passed gently. The field remained dry, unchanged by human concern. He noticed something subtle. The land itself was not tense. It was waiting, but without anxiety. The traveler closed his eyes and noticed his own body. The way his shoulders rested against the ground, the way his breath slowed when nothing was demanded of it, the way the night continued, indifferent to his thoughts. Chen shifted restlessly beside him. "I'm afraid," Chen admitted softly, "that if I stop worrying, everything will fall apart." Lao Jiang turned his head slightly. "And if you don't stop?" he asked. Chen had no answer. The night deepened. Stars moved slowly across the sky. Time passed without explanation. The field remained dry, and yet the quiet did not feel hostile. The traveler noticed his own thoughts stirring familiar patterns of waiting, anticipating, preparing for what might go wrong. He let them be. He did not follow them. He did not argue with them. Gradually, the weight of waiting eased. Not because anything had changed, but because he was no longer standing guard against the night. Sleep came quietly, and though the land was still dry, the body learned that rest did not need permission from the future. Morning came to the fields without ceremony. The sun rose as it always did, steady and indifferent, casting light across the cracked earth. The drought had not ended during the night. The soil remained pale and dry beneath the open sky. Nothing had been repaired while they slept. And yet, something had shifted. Chen woke with the familiar heaviness in his chest, but it no longer pressed as sharply as before. The tightness that usually greeted him in the morning felt looser now, as though the night had gently unfastened something he had been gripping for too long. Lao Jiang was already awake. He knelt near the edge of the field, letting dry soil run slowly through his fingers. He did not rush to stand. He did not scan the sky. He simply felt the earth as it was. "The land is still waiting," Chen said quietly. "Yes," Lao Jiang replied. "And so are we." Chen sat up, rubbing his eyes. "I don't understand how you stay so calm," he said. "Every day I wake up thinking about what might fail." Lao Jiang stood slowly, brushing the soil from his hands. "The land does not belong to your worry," he said. "It belongs to time." They worked together as the morning unfolded, not with hope that demanded an outcome, not with despair that refused effort. They tended what could still be tended, adjusting irrigation channels, clearing small stones, checking the few plants that still held green in their leaves. Each movement was careful, complete, and unhurried. The traveler watched from nearby. He noticed how Lao Jiang moved without looking ahead, without rehearsing the future in his mind. His actions did not depend on what might come later. They were grounded entirely in what was needed now. As the sun climbed higher, Chen paused and leaned on his tool. "I stayed awake most of the night," he admitted, listening, waiting. Lao Jiang looked at him gently. "And what did you hear?" he asked. Chen thought for a moment. "The wind," he said. "My breath. The sound of insects moving in the dark." Lao Jiang nodded. "Then the night did its work," he said. That evening, as the heat softened and the sky shifted toward dusk, faint clouds gathered far on the horizon. They were thin, uncertain, easy to ignore. Chen noticed them and felt the old reflex stir the urge to hope too tightly, to prepare for disappointment before it arrived. He remembered the night before. He remembered lying awake, guarding the future, and he remembered how the land had not needed that vigilance. When darkness returned, the traveler rested beside them again. This time, Chen did not speak of fear. He listened instead to the rhythm of the field settling, to the quiet presence of those nearby, to the steady truth that some things arrive only when we stop waiting for them. Sleep came more easily, not because rain had fallen, not because answers had appeared, but because the body had learned it was safe to rest even in uncertainty. Before dawn, a soft sound moved across the field. At first it was barely noticeable. A gentle tapping, a subtle shift in the air. Rain touched the earth for the first time in many weeks. Not heavy, not dramatic, just enough. The soil darkened slowly, drinking without urgency. Plants lifted slightly, responding in their own time. Chen stood quietly in the rain, letting it touch his face. "I didn't bring this," he said softly. Lao Jiang smiled. "No," he said, "and neither did your worry stop it." The traveler prepared to leave as the rain continued. He looked back once more at the field, not transformed, not saved, but nourished. As he walked on, the rain faded behind him, and the understanding remained. Rest does not come from control. It comes from trust. Even when the ground is dry, even when the night is long. The rain remained behind the traveler as he continued onward. The sound of it faded, gradually replaced by the quiet rhythm of footsteps on earth. The lesson of the field did not linger as words. It settled deeper than that, into the body, into the breath, into the understanding that some nights soften only when we stop standing watch. And along the next stretch of road, another kind of loss waited to be seen. After the rain faded into the distance, the road led the traveler toward the mountains. The air grew thinner and cooler with each step. The land rose gently, and the sound of water softened into memory. Here the world felt quieter, as though it had already released what it could not hold. At the edge of a mountain town stood a large library. Its stone walls were tall and darkened by time. Narrow windows lined its sides, and inside shelves rose high, crowded with scrolls and books gathered across many generations. People came from far away to study there, believing the knowledge it contained could protect them from uncertainty, from loss, from the fear of not knowing. The keeper of the library was a scholar named Wei. He had spent most of his life among those shelves. He knew the weight of each book, the sound each page made when turned. At night, when the town slept, Wei often remained awake, reading by lamplight, afraid that if he stopped, something important might slip away. The traveler arrived one evening as the air grew dry and restless. Wei was inside, carefully returning a volume to its place, his movements precise, almost tense. Every book had a position. Every shelf had an order. And Wei believed that as long as the order remained intact, the world would too. "You may look," Wei said when he noticed the traveler, "but please be careful." The traveler nodded and walked slowly between the shelves. There was a heaviness in the air, not from silence, but from holding. That night the wind changed. It moved sharply through the mountain pass, carrying heat and the scent of smoke. At first the fire seemed distant, a glow beyond the rooftops, a murmur in the streets. By the time Wei noticed, the smoke had already reached the library windows. People shouted. Buckets passed from hand to hand. Footsteps echoed urgently through the town. Wei ran toward the library. When he reached the entrance, flames were already licking at the outer walls. Smoke poured through the open windows, turning familiar shelves into dark shapes. Inside were the words he had guarded for decades. The teachings, the histories, the answers he believed were keeping everything from falling apart. Someone grasped his arm. "There's no time," they said. "You must leave." Wei pulled away. "If I don't save them," he said, his voice shaking, "they'll be gone." The traveler stood nearby watching. Wei rushed inside. The heat pressed in immediately. Smoke blurred the shelves. The air grew thick and heavy. Wei grabbed whatever he could reach, clutching scrolls and books to his chest. Each step felt heavier than the last. His breath shortened, his heart raced. The fire moved steadily behind him, indifferent to effort, and in the chaos, a quiet question surfaced, gentle, almost unnoticed. "If everything burns, will I burn too?" Wei stopped. The books trembled in his hands. He looked around at the shelves, rows upon rows of knowledge he could never carry all at once. For the first time, he saw the truth clearly. He had been guarding words as if they could make him permanent. Wei lowered the books to the floor. He stepped outside just as flames swallowed the doorway. The library burned through the night. As dawn approached, the fire quieted. Only blackened beams and ash remained. People gathered silently, staring at what was lost. Wei stood among them, empty-handed. Something inside him had broken, and something else, something quieter, had been released. That night, beneath a smoke-stained sky, Wei slept deeply for the first time in many years. Not because his mind was full, but because there was nothing left to protect. The morning after the fire arrived without sound. No bell marked the hour. No voice announced the day. Light filtered gently through smoke that still lingered in the air, softening the edges of the mountains and dulling the colors of the town. Where the library once stood, there was only space. Blackened beams rested quietly against the ground. Ash covered the stones in a thin, uneven layer, as if the night had exhaled and not yet drawn its next breath. Wei returned there alone. He did not search through the remains. He did not kneel to gather fragments. He simply stood, breathing slowly, letting his eyes rest on what was no longer there. For many years, his nights had been filled with vigilance. His mind had moved constantly, reviewing, preserving, holding. Now there was nothing left to review, and in that absence his body felt something unfamiliar. Release. As the day unfolded, people came and went. Some spoke softly about rebuilding. Some shook their heads in quiet disbelief. Others avoided the place entirely. Wei remained. He noticed how the mind still tried to reach, looking for something to grasp, something to organize, something to protect. Each time it did, it found only open air. At first, the emptiness frightened him. Then slowly it softened. That evening, Wei sat beneath a tree near the edge of town. The traveler joined him without a word. "They say you lost everything," the traveler said gently. Wei nodded. "Yes, and yet," the traveler continued, "you seem different." Wei rested his hands on the ground beside him. "For years," he said, "I believed knowledge would keep me safe. That if I remembered enough, understood enough, nothing could truly be lost." He looked toward the darkening sky. "But when the fire came," he continued, "I saw that understanding does not prevent impermanence. It only delays rest." The traveler listened quietly. "At night," Wei said, "I no longer feel the need to guard my thoughts. There is nothing left that depends on my vigilance." He paused. "That frightens me," he admitted. "And it calms me." When night returned, the town lay unusually still. Wei lay down beneath the open sky. Smoke drifted faintly above, thinning as the hours passed. A thought arose, an old habit. What if I forget something important? He noticed it. He did not follow it. He did not answer it. The thought faded, leaving space behind. His breathing deepened. His body softened. Sleep arrived gently without resistance. Not because loss no longer hurt, but because nothing was being held against it. Before dawn, Wei woke briefly. The stars were visible again, faint but steady. The place where the library had stood was quiet, unchanged by his watching or his rest. He realized then that nothing had been taken from him that sleep could not survive. When morning came, he rose without urgency. The traveler had already gone, and Wei remained standing in open space, carrying less than he ever had before. And for the first time, it felt like enough. The road grew narrower as the traveler moved farther from the mountains. The air cooled and the sounds of the town disappeared behind him. What remained was a gentle, quiet one that did not ask for attention, only presence. Loss had softened into space. And in that space, the next lesson waited, small and easily overlooked. The mountain town slowly disappeared behind the traveler. The road descended gently, following the curve of a shallow stream that moved quietly through stones worn smooth by time. The air felt cooler here, calmer, as though the land itself had settled after holding too much for too long. Water flowed without pause. It did not hurry. It did not hesitate. It did not look back. Near the edge of the stream, the traveler noticed a monk sitting very still on a flat stone. His posture was relaxed, almost loose, as though effort had quietly left his body. His gaze rested lightly on the moving water. Not fixed, not distant, simply present. The monk's name was Ananda. People in nearby villages spoke of him with gentle respect. Not because he taught many words, but because he never turned away from suffering, no matter how small or inconvenient it seemed. As the traveler approached, Ananda did not look up. Instead, He reached calmly into the stream and lifted a small scorpion from the water. Its body writhed weakly, legs moving without direction as the current threatened to pull it under again. The traveler stopped. "Be careful," he said instinctively. "It will sting you." Ananda smiled softly. He placed the scorpion onto a dry stone beside him. For a moment it rested there motionless. Then, as if unaware of the help it had received, it slipped again, tumbling back into the water. Without hesitation, Ananda reached for it once more. The traveler watched unease rising in his chest. "Why do you keep doing that?" he asked. "It will only hurt you." Ananda's hand bore a small mark already red, tender, unmistakable. "The scorpion stings," Ananda said calmly. "That is its nature." He lifted the creature gently again and set it back on the stone. And to help, he continued his mine. The words were simple. They did not explain. They did not justify. They simply rested where they were. They sat together beside the stream as the water continued its steady movement. At night, the traveler said after a while, "I lie awake thinking about pain I've already felt. Pain that might return. I try to protect myself from it." Ananda dipped his fingers into the stream, letting the water pass through them. "Yes," he said, "many people do." The traveler watched the current move around Ananda's hand uninterrupted. "When you try to protect yourself completely," Ananda continued, "you must remain tense, and tension keeps the body awake." The traveler felt the truth of that settle slowly. "But if I don't guard myself," he said, "won't I be hurt again?" Ananda looked at him gently. "You may be," he said, "but not always in the way you imagine." He lifted another small stone from the ground and let it fall into the stream. It disappeared immediately, absorbed without trace. "Pain arrives," Ananda said, "and then it leaves. Suffering stays when we hold it." The traveler fell silent. That evening, as the light softened and shadows lengthened along the stream, the traveler rested nearby. The familiar tightening returned briefly, the reflex to brace against the night, to prepare for discomfort before it arrived. He noticed it. He did not argue with it. He did not push it away. He allowed it to sit just as Ananda allowed the scorpion to rest on the stone. Gradually, the tension softened. Thoughts passed like water over rock. Sensations rose and fell. Breath deepened on its own. Sleep came gently. Not because pain had disappeared, but because it was no longer being resisted. Morning light reached the stream gently. The water moved as it always had, slipping past stones without memory of the night before. The scorpion was gone now, carried somewhere beyond sight, following its own quiet instinct. Nothing in the landscape marked what had happened, and yet something subtle remained. Ananda sat in the same place, his posture unchanged. The small sting on his hand had softened overnight. It was still there, but it no longer demanded attention. Like many things, it had arrived, spoken briefly, and begun to leave. The traveler sat beside him, listening to the steady sound of water sliding over smooth rock. "You were hurt," the traveler said softly, "and yet you seem at ease." Ananda nodded. "Pain visited," he said. Then it moved on. The traveler was quiet for a moment. "At night," he said, "I prepare myself for pain that hasn't happened yet. I replay old wounds. I imagine new ones." Ananda turned slightly toward him. "Yes," he said, "that is how pain learns to stay longer than it needs to." He reached down and lifted a small stone from the ground, turning it slowly in his fingers. "When the scorpion stung me," he continued, "there was pain. That was natural. But if I keep thinking about the sting, replaying it, resisting it, I add something extra. He placed the stone back beside the stream. The body knows how to feel pain, Ananda said gently. The mind is the one that refuses to let it pass. The traveler felt those words settle into his chest, not as instruction, but as recognition. They walked slowly along the stream as the morning unfolded. Sunlight filtered through the trees, breaking across the water in shifting patterns. The traveler noticed how Ananda did not avoid the stream, did not move with caution, sharpened by fear. His steps were natural, unguarded. "You aren't afraid of being hurt again?" the traveler asked. Ananda smiled faintly. "I am aware," he said, "but I am not armored." He paused, resting his hand lightly against the trunk of a nearby tree. "When you lie awake at night," he said, "you are often guarding yourself against moments that are not happening." The traveler felt the truth of that quietly unfold. He remembered how often his body remained tense long after the danger had passed. How many nights he had spent defending himself from imagined pain. That evening, the traveler rested near the stream once more. The water's sound blended with the approaching night. Crickets began their steady rhythm. The air cooled slowly, inviting the body to soften. A memory surfaced, a face, a moment, a familiar ache. He noticed it. He did not tighten around it. He did not push it away. He allowed the sensation to move through him, just as the stream moved past the stones. The memory softened. The body relaxed. Breath deepened without effort. Sleep arrived quietly. Not because pain had disappeared, but because it was no longer being held. Before leaving, the traveler bowed to Ananda. "I don't know if I can always remain open," he said. Ananda nodded. "You don't need to," he replied. "Only enough to rest." As the traveler walked away, the stream continued its steady movement, and within him something quiet remained. An understanding that rest does not come from avoiding pain, but from letting it pass when it is ready. The stream curved away behind the traveler, its sound fading into a memory rather than a presence. What remained was a gentler awareness, one that did not brace itself against what might come next. The road felt quieter now, not because it lacked sound, but because nothing within him was arguing with it. And on that quiet road, he came upon a place where people gathered for one reason only. The stream curved away behind the traveler, its sound fading gradually until it became memory rather than presence. The road widened, then flattened, leading him toward a small settlement where life moved slowly and predictably. There was no gate, no sign announcing arrival, only the quiet rhythm of people coming and going with purpose that did not feel urgent. At the center of the settlement stood an old well. Its stones were smooth, darkened by years of water and touch. A thick rope hung loosely over its edge, worn soft by countless hands. Buckets rested nearby, some cracked, some new, all equally functional. People came throughout the day. They lowered the bucket. They waited. They pulled it back up. They took what they needed, and they left. No one lingered longer than necessary. The keeper of the well was a man named Tikmin. He sat on a low stool nearby, watching without watching. His posture was relaxed, his gaze soft, as if nothing here required close supervision. He did not rush anyone. He did not instruct. He trusted the rhythm that had sustained the village long before him. The traveler arrived as dusk approached. The air had cooled slightly and the day's activity was slowing. Tik-min noticed him and nodded. "You may rest here," he said quietly. "The well has a room." The traveler sat beside him, listening to the rope slide gently over stone as another bucket was lowered. For a long while, neither spoke. Down, up, pour, leave. The rhythm repeated without variation. At night, the traveler said eventually, "My mind feels like this well. I keep lowering thoughts into it, hoping something will come back different." Tik-min smiled faintly. "And does it?" he asked. The traveler shook his head. "It always returns the same weight." Tik-min rested his hand on the stone edge of the well. "This well has been here longer than either of us," he said. "It does not worry about being empty. It trusts that water will return when it is needed." The traveler leaned forward, peering into the darkness below. "But what if it doesn't?" he asked. Tik-min did not answer immediately. He watched another bucket disappear into the depths, then rise again, heavy with water. "Then we will be thirsty," he said calmly. "And then we will drink when water comes again." The simplicity of the response surprised the traveler. As night settled, fewer people came to the well. The rope lay still, the buckets rested, the stones cooled under the darkening sky. The traveler noticed how Tik-min did not prepare water in advance, did not store more than was needed. He trusted the cycle completely. "Use return rest. When you lie awake," Tik-min said softly, "you keep drawing from the same place." The traveler nodded. "You lower the bucket again and again," Tik-min continued, "even when nothing new can rise." He looked at the traveler kindly. "Tonight," he said, "when a thought appears, do not lower the bucket. Let the well be deep." That night, the traveler rested near the well. The darkness felt wide rather than heavy. Sounds came and went, footsteps in the distance, a faint call from somewhere, unseen the steady rhythm of breath. Thoughts appeared. He noticed them. For the first time, he did not reach for them. He allowed the darkness to remain dark, the depth to remain unknown. His body softened against the ground. His breathing slowed without instruction, and without being drawn up without effort or anticipation. Rest arrived on its own. Morning light reached the well quietly. It touched the stones first, then the rope, then the dark surface of the water far below. The traveler woke nearby, the ground cool beneath him, his body heavy in a way that felt natural rather than draining. He had slept deeply, not without thoughts, not without movement inside the mind, but without the familiar effort of pulling himself back from wakefulness again and again. Tik-min was already awake. He lowered a bucket into the well with slow, steady hands. The rope moved smoothly without scraping or resistance, as if it knew the path by heart. "You rested," Tik-min said without looking up. "Yes," the traveler replied, "even though my thoughts were still there." Tik-min nodded. "Water does not stop flowing because the well is deep," he said. "And rest does not stop arriving because thoughts exist." They sat together as the village began to stir. A woman arrived with an empty bucket. A child followed, watching carefully. The rhythm returned down a poor leaf. The traveler noticed how Tik-min never watched the bucket anxiously while it descended. He did not lean forward. He did not count the seconds. He trusted the depth. "I realized something last night," the traveler said. "When I didn't reach for my thoughts, they felt farther away, less urgent." Tik-min smiled slightly. "Thoughts grow louder when we keep checking on them," he said. like a rope pulled too quickly over stone. The traveler felt the truth of that settle into his body. "So when I lie awake," he said, "I don't need to empty the well." "No," Tickmin replied. "You only need to stop pulling." As the morning passed, the traveler noticed something else. Even when many buckets were lowered, the well did not seem disturbed. It did not rush to refill. It did not announce its depth. It simply remained, holding what it held. "Does the well ever run dry?" the traveler asked. Tickmin looked into its darkness for a long moment. "Sometimes," he said, "and when it does, we wait." No tension followed the words, no fear, just acceptance. The traveler imagined his own mind running dry, empty of answers, empty of plans, and felt how much of his sleeplessness had come from trying to prevent that moment. When it was time to leave, the traveler stood and bowed. "I'm afraid I'll forget this," he said. Tickmin shook his head gently. "You won't forget," he said. "You'll remember when you stop reaching." That night, far from the well, the traveler lay beneath an open sky. A thought appeared. He noticed it. He did not lower the bucket. The thought faded. Another appeared. He let it pass. The darkness remained wide and calm, and rest came again, not because the mind was full, but because it was finally allowed to be deep. The well remained behind the traveler, its quiet depth no longer something he felt compelled to reach into. Each step forward felt less like leaving and more like continuing a rhythm already set in motion. The road widened again, leading him toward a place where sorrow had gathered, waiting not to be solved, but to be seen. The settlement grew quiet as evening approached. The traveler followed a narrow path between small houses until he reached a place where movement seemed to slow on its own. There, beneath the shade of a tree that had witnessed many seasons, sat a woman holding a small bundle close to her chest. Her name was Kisa. People passed nearby, careful with their steps, unsure whether to stop or continue. Some looked away, not out of indifference, but because they did not know how to meet the weight of what they saw. Kisa had lost her child. The loss was recent, still sharp, still raw. It followed her into every corner of the day and refused to loosen its hold when night arrived. Sleep had not come easily, if at all. When exhaustion finally pulled her under, she woke again quickly, afraid that resting meant letting go. The traveler approached slowly and sat a short distance away. He did not speak at first. The quiet between them was heavy, but not empty. "I can't rest," Kisa said eventually, her voice low and steady in a way that revealed how long she had been holding herself together. "If I sleep, it feels like I'm leaving him behind." The traveler listened. At night, she continued, "I stay awake so I can keep him close. I tell myself that as long as I'm alert, he's still here." Her hands tightened around the bundle. The traveler felt the familiar tension in his own chest, the instinct to guard, to hold, to refuse the softness that rest brings. "There is someone nearby," he said gently after a long pause. "Someone who might help you see this differently." Kisa looked up, her eyes tired but attentive. They walked together to a quiet dwelling where an old teacher lived. He listened as Kisa spoke her words, moving between grief and disbelief, between hope and refusal. She spoke of nights without sleep, of fear that rest would erase what little remained. When she finished, the teacher nodded slowly. "There is one thing that may help you," he said. "Bring me mustard seeds." Kisa straightened slightly. "I can do that." But the teacher continued, They must come from a home that has never known loss. The words landed gently without challenge. Kisa hesitated only briefly before agreeing. That day she walked from door to door. At the first house she asked. The family shook their heads quietly. A father, lost to illness. At the next house, a sister gone too soon. Another home, a mother, a friend, a child. Each door opened into a story. Each story carried grief. As the hours passed, Kisa's steps slowed. Her body grew tired, not from walking, but from listening, from realizing how widely sorrow was shared, even when it was hidden. By evening, she returned empty-handed. She sat beneath a tree and rested the bundle gently in her lap. For the first time since her loss, she noticed something unexpected. She was not alone in her grief. That night, exhaustion finally softened her body. Sleep came briefly, not as escape, not as forgetting, but as a pause. A small mercy that allowed her breath to deepen, if only for a moment. And in that pause, the sharpness of her grief eased just enough for her to breathe. Morning arrived quietly for Kisa. Light filtered through the branches of the tree, where she had rested, touching the ground in small, uneven patterns. She woke slowly, her body heavy, her chest still aching. The grief had not disappeared in the night, but it no longer filled every corner. She sat up and noticed her breathing, still shallow, still careful, and yet present. Kisa returned to the teacher's home as the village began to stir. Her hands were empty, her steps slower than before, her eyes tired from listening to so many stories that mirrored her own. "I could not find the seeds," she said softly. The teacher looked at her without surprise. "I know," he replied. They sat together in silence. It was not the silence of avoidance. It was the silence of understanding. "Every home I visited," Kisa said after a while, "had known loss." "Yes," the teacher said, "and yet they continue to live." Kisa lowered her gaze. "I was afraid," she said, "that if I rested even for a moment, I would lose him again." The teacher shook his head gently. "Rest does not abandon love," he said. "It allows love to breathe." The words did not erase her pain, but they softened the way it pressed against her. That night, Kisa returned to her home. The familiar space felt unbearably present. The place where her child once slept seemed louder than any sound. Grief rose again, sharp and immediate, tightening her chest and catching her breath. She did not turn away from it. She did not try to calm herself. She sat on the floor and allowed the feeling to be there. She noticed the ground beneath her, the way her body leaned forward slightly, the way her breath came in short waves, then slowly lengthened. Exhaustion arrived without warning. Her body softened even as tears came. Sleep followed in fragments, light, uneven, interrupted, but it came. And when she woke, she was still herself, still grieving, still loving. Nothing had been taken from her rest. In the days that followed, Kisa noticed something gently changing. Grief still visited her at night, sometimes suddenly, sometimes without reason. But it no longer demanded that she remain awake as proof of her love. She learned slowly that love did not require vigilance. That memory did not fade when her eyes closed. That rest did not erase what mattered. The nights were still long, but they were no longer endless. The traveler watched from a distance as Kisa continued on. Her steps were slower now, but steadier. She carried her loss with care without letting it consume every moment of her night. As he walked away, the understanding followed him quietly. Sleep does not mean forgetting. Rest does not mean letting go of love. It means allowing the heart to survive what it carries. The village slowly faded from view as the traveler continued on. Grief, he realized, did not end where one story finished. It moved quietly from place to place, changing shape, changing weight. And yet beneath it all there remained a steady invitation to rest without needing to escape what was true. As the road bent gently toward a wooded hillside, another quiet meeting awaited him. The village slowly released the traveler back to the road. The sounds of daily life softened behind him. Voices fading, footsteps dissolving into distance until only the quiet movement of the land remained. The path narrowed as it climbed gently toward a wooded hillside, where trees stood close together and light filtered through in slow, uneven patterns. Here nothing felt hurried. Even the air seemed to move more slowly, as though it had learned patience from the forest itself. At the base of the hill, the traveler noticed a man chopping wood. Each strike of the axe was steady and deliberate, not forceful, not hesitant. The sound echoed softly between the trees, then faded, leaving space behind it. The man paused between swings, allowing the rhythm to complete itself before beginning again. His name was Huyn. He was known simply as a woodcutter. He owned no land, taught no students, and spoke little. And yet people often said that sitting near him made their thoughts feel less heavy, as though something unnecessary had quietly been set down. The traveler watched for a while before speaking. "You work very steadily," he said. Huyn nodded, resting the axe against the log. "The wood does not hurry," he replied. "So neither do I." The traveler sat on a nearby stone. The forest moved around them. Leaves shifted gently overhead. A bird called once, then fell silent. Somewhere deeper in the trees, something unseen moved, then passed. At night, the traveler said, "My mind feels like this forest, full of movement, full of sound. I try to clear it, but it only grows louder." Huyn listened without interruption. He set the axe down and sat beside the traveler. "When you look at this forest," Huyn asked, "do you ask it to be silent?" The traveler shook his head. "Do you try to remove every shadow, number?" Huyn nodded. "Then why," he asked gently, "do you ask this of your mind?" The question did not demand an answer. It simply rested there. Huyn picked up a small piece of wood and turned it slowly in his hands. "Many people believe peace comes from stillness," he said, "but stillness is only one shape of peace." He placed the wood on the ground. "This forest is alive," he continued. "Branches move, leaves fall, animals pass through, and yet it is not restless." The traveler listened more closely now, not only to Huyn's words, but to the forest itself. The wind moved without agenda. Sounds appeared and disappeared naturally. Nothing tried to remain. At night, Huyn said, "Your thoughts move because they are alive. Trying to stop them is like trying to stop the forest." "So what should I do?" the traveler asked quietly. Huyn smiled. "Let the forest be a forest," he said, "and let your mind be a mind." The simplicity of the words carried unexpected weight. That evening, the traveler rested near Huyn's shelter. As darkness settled, the hillside did not grow silent. Sounds continued, soft-layered, unremarkable. The forest breathed and the traveler breathed with it. Thoughts appeared, plans, memories, small familiar worries. He noticed them the way he noticed leaves moving above him. He did not try to cut them down. He did not follow them deeper into the woods. He let them exist. Gradually, the familiar tension in his body loosened. His shoulders softened. His breath slowed without instruction. Sleep came naturally, not because the forest grew quiet, but because he no longer asked it to. The village slowly released the traveler back to the road. The sounds of daily life softened behind him. Voices fading, footsteps dissolving into distance until only the quiet movement of the land remained. The path narrowed as it climbed gently toward a wooded hillside where trees stood close together and light filtered through in slow, uneven patterns. Here, nothing felt hurried. Even the air seemed to move more slowly, as though it had learned patience from the forest itself. At the base of the hill, the traveler noticed a man chopping wood. Each strike of the axe was steady and deliberate, not forceful, not hesitant. The sound echoed softly between the trees, then faded, leaving space behind it. The man paused between swings, allowing the rhythm to complete itself before beginning again. His name was Huin. He was known simply as a woodcutter. He owned no land, taught no students, and spoke little. And yet, people often said that sitting near him made their thoughts feel less heavy, as though something unnecessary had quietly been set down. The traveler watched for a while before speaking. "You work very steadily," he said. Huin nodded, resting the axe against the log. "The wood does not hurry," he replied, "so neither do I." The traveler sat on a nearby stone. The forest moved around them. Leaves shifted gently overhead. A bird called once, then fell silent. Somewhere deeper in the trees, something unseen moved, then passed. At night, the traveler said, "My mind feels like this forest, full of movement, full of sound. I try to clear it, but it only grows louder." Huin listened without interruption. He set the axe down and sat beside the traveler. "When you look at this forest," Huin asked, "do you ask it to be silent?" The traveler shook his head. "Do you try to remove every shadow?" Huin nodded. Then, "Why?" he asked gently. "Do you ask this of your mind?" The question did not demand an answer. It simply rested there. Huin picked up a small piece of wood and turned it slowly in his hands. "Many people believe peace comes from stillness," he said. "But stillness is only one shape of peace." He placed the wood on the ground. "This forest is alive," he continued. "Branches move, leaves fall, animals pass through, and yet it is not restless." The traveler listened more closely now, not only to Huin's words, but to the forest itself. The wind moved without agenda. Sounds appeared and disappeared naturally. Nothing tried to remain. At night, Huin said, "Your thoughts move because they are alive. Trying to stop them is like trying to stop the forest." "So what should I do?" the traveler asked quietly. Huin smiled. "Let the forest be a forest," he said, "and let your mind be a mind." The simplicity of the words carried unexpected weight. That evening, the traveler rested near Huin's shelter. As darkness settled, the hillside did not grow silent. Sounds continued, soft, layered, unremarkable. The forest breathed and the traveler breathed with it. Thoughts appeared, plans, memories, small familiar worries. He noticed them the way he noticed leaves moving above him. He did not try to cut them down. He did not follow them deeper into the woods. He let them exist. Gradually, the familiar tension in his body loosened. His shoulders softened. His breath slowed without instruction. Sleep came naturally, not because the forest grew quiet, but because he no longer asked it to. The hillside slowly released the traveler back to the road. The forest thinned. The air opened, and the steady rhythm he had learned to trust followed him without effort. Nothing needed to be carried forward intentionally. What was useful remained on its own. What was not faded quietly away. And as the path widened, he came upon a place where words themselves had once been the focus. The hillside gradually opened back into a gentler path. Trees thinned, light widened, and the forest released the traveler without ceremony. What followed him was not an idea or a lesson, but a quiet ease and understanding that nothing needed to be corrected in order for rest to appear. Near a river that moved steadily through flat land stood a small monastery. Its walls were simple, its entrance unadorned. Nothing about the place announced importance, and yet the air around it felt settled, as if many moments had been allowed to pass without interference. 2 monks lived there. They shared the same space, the same routine, and the same river. But they moved through their days very differently. One monk spent his time polishing. He wiped the floors until they reflected the light. He cleaned the walls carefully. He swept leaves away as soon as they fell. He believed clarity came from constant effort, that the mind must be refined again and again in order to remain pure. The other monk did very little. He swept when sweeping was needed. He sat when sitting arrived. He rested when rest appeared. He did not hurry to remove dust. He did not mind leaves on the ground. He allowed the river to sound as it wished. The traveler arrived in the evening, just as the sun slipped low and the river caught its reflection. He was invited to sit near the entrance hall where the floor gleamed from careful attention. The first monk approached him. "You are welcome here," he said. "But please be mindful. We keep this place very clean." The traveler nodded and sat still. Later, the second monk passed by and placed a cup of tea beside him without a word. The tea was warm, plain, offered without expectation. The contrast lingered quietly. That night the first monk could not sleep. He lay awake, listening to the sound of the river, his mind moving restlessly. A leaf might have fallen somewhere. Dust might have settled while he rested. Something surely was undone. Each thought pulled him back into vigilance. Across the courtyard, the second monk slept easily. His breathing slowed, his body softened. The river continued to flow. The traveler noticed the difference without judgment. In the morning, the 2 monks sat together beneath a tree near the river. The first monk spoke first. "I work constantly to keep the mind clear," he said, "but it never stays that way. Each night my thoughts return." The second monk listened without interruption. Finally, he spoke. "Why do you keep polishing the mirror while it is being used?" he asked gently. The first monk frowned. "If I don't," he said, "it will become dirty." The second monk smiled. "A mirror does not become useless because something passes in front of it," he said. "It only reflects." The words did not argue. They rested. That evening, the traveler lay near the river. He watched reflections move across the water, light breaking, reforming, dissolving. Nothing stayed long enough to be held. Thoughts appeared, images, fragments, quiet questions without answers. He did not reach for them. He did not correct them. He let them pass just as the reflections passed. Gradually, his body softened. Rest arrived naturally. Not because the mind was clear, but because it no longer needed to be cleaned. The river remained behind the traveler, its reflections dissolving naturally as distance grew. What stayed with him was not a teaching but a quiet ease, an understanding that nothing needed to be maintained in order for rest to arrive. And along the next stretch of road, life appeared in its simplest form. The road carried the traveler into a small town, just as evening settled. There was nothing remarkable about the place. No gates, no crowds, only a narrow street, lined with low buildings, their doors opening and closing without urgency. Life moved here without announcing itself. Near the edge of the street sat a tea seller. He worked alone beside a small wooden table, pouring tea for anyone who stopped. There was no sign above him, no list of offerings, only the quiet sound of liquid meeting clay again and again. The tea seller's name was never spoken. People approached, they sat, they drank, they left. No one stayed long. The traveler paused and took a seat. The tea seller poured a cup and placed it in front of him without comment. The tea was warm, plain, unadorned. Steam rose briefly, then vanished into the air. The traveler wrapped his hands around the cup. "I don't understand why my nights are sometimes restless," he said quietly, "even when nothing is wrong." The tea seller continued pouring for another passerby. "When nothing is wrong," he said softly, "the mind looks for something to fix." The traveler nodded. At night, he continued, "I feel as though I should be doing something, preparing, thinking, making sure I don't miss anything." The tea seller set the kettle down. "Does tea prepare itself?" he asked. The traveler watched the steam fade. "No," he said. "It is heated," the tea seller replied. "It is poured. Then it rests." The words were simple. They did not linger. That night, the traveler remained near the street. The town grew quiet in stages. Voices faded first, then footsteps, then the subtle movements of daily life that often go unnoticed until they are gone. The tea seller continued sitting at his table, even when no one came. He poured tea. He waited. He poured again. There was no impatience in his movements, no sense of wasted time. The act itself seemed complete, whether or not anyone drank. The traveler lay down nearby. Darkness settled without resistance. Thoughts appeared as they often did at night. Small ones, unfinished ones. Questions that once felt important. Normally, these thoughts would pull him upright, asking for attention, demanding answers before sleep could arrive. Tonight, he noticed something different. Nothing was being asked of him. The street did not expect him to think. The night did not require explanation. The body did not need instruction. He noticed his breath, slow, unforced, arriving and leaving on its own. The mind drifted not toward answers, but toward softness. There was no moment when sleep began. No clear line between waking and resting. Only a gradual loosening. The weight of the body against the ground. The gentle darkness behind closed eyes. The quiet sense of being held by the night, rather than having to hold it. Thoughts continued to rise and fall, but they no longer formed a story. They were simply movement, like people passing the tea seller's table. Some stopped briefly, some did not. Nothing needed to be followed, nothing needed to be completed. And in that gentle absence of demand, rest arrived naturally. In the morning, the table was gone. The street continued. Life moved on. The traveler rose and continued his journey. And within him remained a quiet understanding. Rest does not need purpose. Presence is enough. The narrow street faded behind the traveler. Morning light stretched across the road ahead, unhurried, indifferent to where he had been or where he would go next. What remained was a gentle emptiness, an openness that no longer felt uncomfortable, no longer asked to be filled. And in that openness, the next story began quietly, almost unnoticed. The narrow street faded behind the traveler as the road curved gently into open land. Here there were no buildings close together, no tables set out for passers-by. The space widened, and with it came a sense of exposure. The sky stretched low and broad, and the horizon offered nothing to lean against. Near a crossroads, the traveler noticed a merchant sitting beside his cart. The cart was well kept. The goods were arranged carefully, each item placed with intention. And yet the man himself looked heavy, as though something unseen pressed down on him, far more than his belongings ever could. The traveler sat a short distance away. "You look tired," he said gently. The merchant let out a slow breath. "I am," he replied, "but I haven't traveled at all today." They sat in silence as the light softened around them. At night, the merchant said after a while, "I have the same dream." The traveler listened without interrupting. In the dream, the merchant continued, "I am someone else. I have a different name, a different life, and yet it feels just as real as this one." He paused, his hands tightening together. "When I wake," he said, "I don't know which life is the true one. I lie there trying to decide who I'm supposed to be." The traveler looked up at the sky where clouds moved slowly without form or name. "And this keeps you awake?" he asked. The merchant nodded. "I'm afraid that if I sleep too deeply, I'll lose myself, or wake up as someone I don't recognize." The words hung in the air, fragile and honest. That night the traveler rested near the merchant's cart. The crossroads were quiet. No travelers passed, no wheels turned. The land held still, as if waiting without expectation. The merchant lay nearby, his breathing shallow at first. "I keep thinking," said softly into the darkness, "that I need to protect something, that if I stop watching myself, I might disappear." The traveler did not answer right away. He watched the stars overhead, steady, silent, unchanged by who noticed them. "They remain," he said finally, "whether you watch them or not." The merchant was quiet. The night deepened. Thoughts continued to move through the merchant's mind. Names, roles, memories, imagined futures. Each one asked to be held, to be defined, to be secured. And slowly, as exhaustion softened his body, those thoughts began to loosen. They no longer demanded answers. They hovered briefly, then drifted away. Breathing slowed. The body rested against the ground, supported without effort. There was no need to decide, no need to choose a name, no need to guard an image. The sense of self softened, not into confusion, but into simplicity. Awareness remained, presence remained, and within that quiet continuity, sleep arrived. Not as certainty, not as clarity, but as surrender. As the night passed, the merchant slept more deeply than he had in many weeks, and the traveler rested too. noticing how identity did not vanish when attention relaxed. It simply stopped asking to be defended. The narrow street faded behind the traveler as the road curved gently into open land. Here there were no buildings close together, no tables set out for passers-by. The space widened, and with it came a sense of exposure. The sky stretched low and broad, and the horizon offered nothing to lean against. Near a crossroads, the traveler noticed a merchant sitting beside his cart. The cart was well kept. The goods were arranged carefully, each item placed with intention, and yet the man himself looked heavy, as though something unseen pressed down on him, far more than his belongings ever could. The traveler sat a short distance away. "You look tired," he said gently. The merchant let out a slow breath. "I am," he replied, "but I haven't traveled at all today." They sat in silence as the light softened around them. At night, the merchant said after a while, "I have the same dream." The traveler listened without interrupting. In the dream, the merchant continued, "I am someone else. I have a different name, a different life, and yet it feels just as real as this one." He paused, his hands tightening together. "When I wake," he said, "I don't know which life is the true one. I lie there trying to decide who I'm supposed to be." The traveler looked up at the sky where clouds moved slowly without form or name. "And this keeps you awake?" he asked. The merchant nodded. "I'm afraid that if I sleep too deeply, I'll lose myself, or wake up as someone I don't recognize." The words hung in the air, fragile and honest. That night, the traveler rested near the merchant's cart. The crossroads were quiet. No travelers passed, no wheels turned. The land held still, as if waiting without expectation. The merchant lay nearby, his breathing shallow at first. "I keep thinking," he said softly into the darkness, "that I need to protect something, that if I stop watching myself, I might disappear." The traveler did not answer right away. He watched the stars overhead, steady, silent, unchanged by who noticed them. "They remain," he said finally, "whether you watch them or not." The merchant was quiet. The night deepened. Thoughts continued to move through the merchant's mind. Names, roles, memories, imagined futures. Each one asked to be held, to be defined, to be secured. And slowly, as exhaustion softened his body, those thoughts began to loosen. They no longer demanded answers. They hovered briefly, then drifted away. Breathing slowed. The body rested against the ground, supported without effort. There was no need to decide, no need to choose a name, no need to guard an image. The sense of self softened not into confusion, but into simplicity. Awareness remained, presence remained, and within that quiet continuity, sleep arrived. Not as certainty, not as clarity, but as surrender. As the night passed, the merchant slept more deeply than he had in many weeks, and the traveler rested too, noticing how identity did not vanish when attention relaxed. It simply stopped asking to be defended. The crossroads disappeared behind the traveler as the road curved gently into open land. The questions of identity, of names and roles, no longer followed him with urgency. They arose occasionally like distant echoes, then faded on their own. What remained was a quiet steadiness, a sense of being carried rather than having to carry. And beneath a wide sky, another story unfolded. The road rose gently as the traveler moved onward. The land opened into a wide hillside where grass bent easily beneath the wind, and the sky felt closer, broader, more forgiving. There were no buildings here, no markers of direction, only open space and a slow, unhurried sense of time. Near the crest of the hill, the traveler noticed an old monk resting against a large stone. He was not sitting upright. He was not lying down. He leaned back comfortably as though effort had slowly left his body over many years. His eyes were half closed, not asleep, not fully awake. Above him, a single cloud drifted across the sky, stretching and thinning without urgency. People who passed this way called him the lazy cloud monk, not because he avoided responsibility, but because he never seemed to hurry toward anything. The traveler sat nearby. "You rest a great deal," he said quietly. The monk smiled, his eyes still half closed. "So does the cloud," he replied. The traveler followed his gaze upward. The cloud moved slowly, changing shape without resistance, carried by something unseen. "It doesn't seem concerned about where it's going," the traveler said. "No," the monk replied. "The sky holds it." They sat together in silence. The wind passed. The grass shifted. The cloud continued on. At night, the traveler said, "I still notice thoughts appearing, even after all I've learned." The monk nodded slightly. "Clouds appear in the sky," he said. "That does not mean the sky is disturbed." The words did not explain. They settled. The monk shifted gently, adjusting his weight against the stone. "Many people try to clear the sky," he continued. "They chase clouds away. They exhaust themselves." The traveler smiled faintly. "And the clouds return." "Yes," the monk said, "because they were never the problem." The wind moved again, cool and steady. "When you lie awake," the monk said softly, "notice what remains when a thought passes." The traveler considered this. "The space," he said. The monk nodded. "That space is always here. You do not need to protect it." The traveler felt something ease, not in his mind, but in his body. That evening, the traveler rested on the hillside. The sky darkened gradually without announcement. Stars appeared one by one, scattered across the open space above him. Clouds drifted through them, softening their light, then moving on. The traveler lay back, feeling the ground support his weight fully. Thoughts appeared, simple ones, old ones, thoughts that once would have asked for attention. He noticed them. He did not follow them. He did not push them away. Each thought passed like a cloud, crossing the stars, briefly visible, then gone. Between them there was space. Wide, unbothered, unchanging. The body began to soften. Shoulders released their quiet holding. Breath slowed on its own. The familiar tension of waiting for sleep loosened. The night did not ask him to do anything, and for the first time in a long while, he did not ask anything of it. There was no moment when rest began, no signal, no shift to mark the transition, only a gentle drifting. Awareness remained, but effort faded. Thoughts thinned, but did not disappear. Breath moved without guidance. The sense of being someone who needed to sleep softened into simply being. Clouds continued to move overhead. The sky remained wide enough to hold them all. Nothing needed to be watched. Nothing needed to be managed. The body rested because it could. Before dawn, the traveler stirred briefly. The cloud from the night before was gone, now dissolved into something unseen. The sky remained unchanged by its passing. The lazy cloud monk still leaned against the stone. his posture unaltered, his presence steady. "You're still here," the traveler said softly. The monk smiled. "So are you." They sat together until light began to return. "I used to believe," the traveler said, "that if I rested too deeply, I might lose something important." The monk chuckled quietly. "What have you lost by resting?" he asked. The traveler considered this carefully. "Nothing," he said. "Exactly," the monk replied. "What is real does not disappear when you stop watching it." The traveler bowed as he continued down the road. The understanding followed him quietly. Thoughts may come and go. Clouds may pass. But the sky never needs to sleep in order to remain. The road descended gently from the hillside. Grass gave way to firmer ground, and the open sky slowly narrowed as the land settled into softer contours. The traveler walked without urgency, carrying no expectation of what might come next. What remained from the hill was not an idea, but a feeling, light, spacious, unforced. By evening, he reached a quiet stretch of road where the land dipped slightly, forming a natural hollow. The air here felt still protected from wind, as if the earth itself had created a place to rest. The traveler stopped. There was no reason to continue walking. There was no reason to stop. And yet, stopping felt natural. He sat, then lay back, letting his body settle into the shape of the ground. Earlier in his journey, this moment would have brought effort. He would have checked his thoughts, adjusted his posture, wondered whether rest would come or remain distant. Tonight, none of that arose. Thoughts still appeared. Fragments of a memory, soft impressions from the day, images without edges. They floated briefly, then drifted on, leaving no trace. The sky above was wide, dim, and calm, and within that calm, the traveler noticed something subtle. Nothing was holding him awake. As darkness deepened, the night wrapped gently around the hollow. Sounds softened first, then faded. The traveler noticed his breath moving slowly, evenly, without instruction. Each inhale arrived on its own. Each exhale released without effort. Thoughts returned occasionally. A question, a memory, a faint trace of identity. He noticed them the way one notices distant lights, present but not demanding approach. There was no urgency to understand, no impulse to correct, no need to remain alert. The body responded naturally. Muscles released their quiet tension. The jaw softened. The space behind the eyes grew warm and heavy. The night did not require him to let go. Letting go happened by itself. There was no watcher left to observe the drifting, only drifting. Awareness thinned gently like mist dissolving as air warms. Sensations blurred at the edges, then blended into a single steady feeling of rest. Breath continued. The body remained supported. The ground held firm. Nothing was missing. Nothing was ending. Sleep did not arrive as an event. It unfolded. Before morning, the traveler woke briefly. There was no thought attached to the waking. Only a soft awareness of being suspended between rest and movement. The sky was still dark, untouched by light. He turned slightly, then settled again. Rest resumed without effort. When morning came, it did so quietly. Light crept across the land, touching the edges of the hollow, revealing grass, bent by night air. The traveler rose slowly, feeling rested without needing to name why. The road was still there. The sky was unchanged. Nothing had been gained. Nothing had been lost. As he walked on, the understanding remained with him, not as a thought, but as a steady presence. Rest does not require depth, only permission. The hillside fell away behind the traveler as the road descended gently into a wide open plain. Nothing remarkable marked this stretch of land. No villages, no teachers, no signs pointing toward meaning. And yet the quiet here felt complete, as though nothing more needed to happen. It was in this ordinary space that the final teaching revealed itself, not as words but as absence. The hollow slowly released the traveler back onto the road. Morning had come and gone without marking itself, and now the day leaned gently toward evening again. The land here was wide and unremarkable, stretching out in soft lines that offered no resistance and no promise. Nothing asked to be noticed, nothing asked to be remembered. For the first time in a long while, the traveler realized that no new questions were forming. Thoughts still appeared, but they no longer gathered into stories. They rose briefly, like breath on cool air, then faded before taking shape. There was nothing to solve, nothing to improve. By dusk, he came upon a small shelter beside the road. It was simple, 4 posts, a roof, and open sides. No door, no walls to define inside from outside. It looked less like a place meant to stay and more like a place meant to pause. The traveler stepped inside. There was no one there, no teacher waiting, no voice to greet him, no lesson prepared. He sat down and rested his back against one of the posts. At first, the quiet felt unfamiliar. Without conversation, without instruction, the mind searched briefly for something to hold on to. A thought arose, then another, each one light unfinished, easily released. And then slowly the unfamiliar became gentle. The sky darkened without effort. Shadows lengthened, then softened. Sounds from the road faded until only the subtle movements of night remained, the faint stirring of air, the quiet rhythm of insects somewhere beyond sight. The traveler lay down. The ground was firm, the air was cool. The body settled naturally into stillness. Nothing needed to be adjusted. A thought appeared, then another. He noticed them without interest, without resistance. They no longer felt like invitations. They did not ask to be followed or answered. Between them there was a wide open presence. Not silence, not emptiness, just being. As the night deepened, the shelter held its quiet shape. The traveler's breath slowed on its own, each movement gentle and complete. The body released the subtle tension it had learned to carry through countless nights of waiting. Thoughts returned now and then. A fragment of memory, a faint image, a trace of something once important. Each one appeared briefly, then dissolved, leaving no echo behind. There was no effort in allowing this, no discipline, no method. The night did not ask him to rest. Rest happened because nothing stood in the way. The sense of time softened. Moments blended into one another without edge or urgency. The mind no longer measured the distance between wakefulness and sleep. There was no clear point where awareness thinned. No moment to mark the crossing, only a gradual drifting. The weight of the body against the ground, the gentle darkness behind closed eyes, the steady continuation of breath. Awareness remained but without center. No watcher, no direction, no need to remain. The night held everything without effort. And within that holding rest, deepened naturally. Before dawn, the traveler stirred briefly. There was no reason for the movement, no thought attached to it. He shifted, then settled again as easily as a leaf resettling on still water. Sleep resumed without interruption. When morning eventually arrived, it did so quietly. Light filtered into the shelter, touching the ground, the posts, the open space beyond. The traveler rose slowly, feeling rested without needing to name the feeling. The road waited. The shelter remained. Nothing signaled an ending, and yet something felt complete. The traveler stepped back onto the road, carrying nothing forward. No teaching, no insight, no conclusion. Only the quiet recognition that rest had never been something to reach. It had been waiting in the absence of effort all along. The road unfolded gently ahead of the traveler. There was no sense of leaving the shelter behind, no feeling of departure. The pause he had taken seemed to move with him now, woven quietly into each step. The land remained open and simple, offering nothing to resist and nothing to pursue. By the time evening approached again, the traveler noticed something subtle. He was no longer waiting for night. There was no anticipation of rest, no concern about whether sleep would come or remain distant. The day softened on its own, and with it the body began to settle naturally, as though it already understood the rhythm. He stopped near a wide stretch of ground open to the sky. There was no shelter here, no protection, no boundary between himself and the night. And yet there was no unease. He lay down, letting the earth receive his weight fully. Thoughts appeared briefly, as they always had. But now they felt thinner. They did not form questions. They did not gather momentum. They passed like faint ripples across still water, barely leaving a trace before dissolving. The traveler noticed his breath, not counting, not guiding, simply noticing. The body responded with ease. Muscles softened without instruction. The chest loosened. The familiar habit of alertness did not arise. Nothing needed to be managed. As darkness deepened, the open land held its quiet shape. The sky stretched wide overhead, scattered with stars that did not ask to be observed. The air cooled gradually, touching the skin lightly without urgency. The traveler remained still. Thoughts surfaced occasionally. A memory, a fragment of sound, a fleeting sense of self. Each one arrived gently, then moved on. There was no effort in letting them pass. The mind did not need to be convinced. The body did not need reassurance. The night did not ask him to release anything. Release happened because there was nothing left to hold. The sense of time loosened further. Moments blended. Edges softened. Awareness rested without center. There was no boundary between resting and being awake, only drifting. The feeling of the ground beneath the body. The darkness behind closed eyes. The steady continuation of breath, moving without direction. No watcher remained. No one waited for sleep. And yet sleep deepened. Not as an event, not as a transition, but as a quiet unfolding, like dusk turning into night without announcement. Before morning, the traveler stirred once more. There was no thought attached to the movement. He shifted slightly, then settled again, the way the body adjusts itself without asking permission. Rest continued. When light eventually returned, it did so gently. The traveler opened his eyes to a sky unchanged by the night. The land looked the same as it had before. He lay down open, unremarkable, complete. He rose slowly. There was no feeling of completion, no sense of arrival, and yet nothing felt unfinished. As he walked on, the understanding moved with him quietly. There was never a final lesson. There was never a last step. Only the gradual easing of effort, and the rest that follows naturally. The road no longer felt like a path leading somewhere. It was simply ground beneath the traveler's feet, appearing where each step landed, then disappearing behind him without leaving a trace. The sense of progress had softened into something quieter movement, without direction, presence, without purpose. As evening approached, the land opened into a wide, empty plain. No trees marked the horizon. No buildings broke the line of the sky. Nothing stood out enough to be named. The traveler slowed, then stopped. Not because he was tired, not because he was searching. Stopping simply happened. He stood for a moment, feeling the air move gently across his skin, then lay down on the open ground. There was no shelter here, no boundary to create inside and outside. The sky stretched fully above him, wide and indifferent. For a long while, nothing occurred. Thoughts did not rush in. Feelings did not announce themselves. There was only the body resting, only breath arriving and leaving, only the steady presence of night. He noticed something quietly surprising. There was no desire for the night to end, no wish for sleep to arrive, no fear of remaining awake. The absence of wanting felt complete. Earlier in his journey, this emptiness would have unsettled him. He would have searched for meaning, looked for instruction, wondered what he was supposed to do next. Now none of that arose. The mind remained open, spacious, unoccupied. Thoughts appeared occasionally, soft, incomplete, without urgency. They did not gather into stories. They did not linger long enough to be followed. Each one dissolved naturally, leaving the space unchanged. As darkness deepened, the plain held its quiet shape. The sky grew darker, then softened again as stars appeared scattered without pattern. The air cooled gradually, touching the body lightly without demand. The traveler noticed his breath moving steadily, in, out. No effort guided it. No awareness needed to follow it. The body settled more deeply into the ground, releasing subtle tension that had once felt permanent. Muscles softened. The space behind the eyes grew heavy and warm. There was no sense of time passing. Moments blended gently into one another without edge or separation. The mind no longer measured wakefulness against sleep. Nothing asked him to rest. Rest arrived because nothing remained in the way. There was no moment when awareness faded, no point of crossing, no shift to observe, only drifting. The feeling of the ground beneath the body, the quiet darkness behind closed eyes, the steady continuation of breath, moving on its own. No watcher remained, no effort remained. The sense of being someone dissolved gently, not into nothing, but into simplicity. The night held everything without distinction, and within that holding rest, deepened naturally. Before dawn, the traveler stirred briefly. There was no thought attached to the movement. He turned slightly, then settled again the way the body adjusts itself without instruction. Sleep resumed without interruption. When morning arrived, it did so quietly. Light touched the plain without ceremony. The sky looked exactly as it had before, wide open, unchanged by the night. The traveler rose slowly. There was no sense of arrival, no feeling of completion, and yet, nothing felt unfinished. As he took his first steps forward, the understanding moved with him effortlessly. There was never a final destination. There was never something to achieve. Rest had always been present, waiting for nothing at all. The road did not change after the traveler left the crossroads. There was no sign to mark what had been understood, no clear feeling of progress to carry forward. The world remained ordinary dust beneath his feet. Wind moving through open land, the sky stretching wide and quiet. And yet something inside him had softened. The urgency to define himself had grown quieter. The need to protect an image of who he was, who he should be, no longer felt as sharp. Not gone, just less commanding. As evening approached, he found a small village resting low against the land. Houses were spaced apart, their roofs darkening as the light fell. Lamps appeared in windows one by one. Doors closed gently, as if the night were something to be kept outside. The traveler walked slowly along the main path, listening to the subtle sounds of people settling into their homes. A last bucket of water carried indoors, a quiet laugh, a child's voice fading into stillness. And then he noticed one door that was not closed. It was slightly open, just enough to show a thin line of warm light across the ground. The traveler paused. The open door did not look accidental. It did not swing in the wind. It remained still deliberate, as though it had been left that way with full awareness. He stepped closer and looked inside. An old man sat alone on a low stool near the center of the room. He was not busy. He was not reading or sorting or preparing. His hands rested loosely on his knees. His back was straight, but unstrained like a tree that had stopped resisting the weather long ago. He did not look toward the door. He did not seem to be waiting for anyone. The traveler cleared his throat softly, careful not to startle him. The old man turned his head slightly, his eyes calm. "You may sit," he said, as if the traveler had already been expected. The traveler stepped just inside the doorway and sat near the threshold, not fully entering, not fully remaining outside. The open door stayed as it was, offering both the night air and the warm interior at the same time. "You've left it open," the traveler said quietly. The old man nodded. "Yes. Aren't you afraid someone might enter?" the traveler asked. The old man smiled faintly, the way someone smiles when hearing a question they have heard many times before. "If they do," he said, "I will notice." The traveler listened to the softness in his voice, but they could take something the traveler said, or disturb your rest. The old man's gaze remained steady. "Everything can be taken," he replied. Even with the door closed, the words landed gently without force. The traveler looked at the doorway again, at the thin line between inside and outside, between safety and exposure, between warmth and wind. "At night," the traveler admitted, "I keep my mind tightly closed." The old man did not interrupt. "I guard it," the traveler continued. "I lock every thought, every memory. I try to keep everything in order, and still I cannot rest." The old man's eyes softened slightly, as if he recognized the weight beneath those words. "A locked door can keep things out," he said, "but it can also keep you in." The traveler felt something tighten briefly in his chest, then loosen again, as though the sentence had touched a place that was already tired of being held. Sometimes, the traveler said, "It feels like if I stop guarding myself, I will lose something important." The old man nodded slowly. "And what is it you believe you are guarding?" he asked. The traveler hesitated. He wanted to give a clear answer, a name, a reason, a shape. But the moment he tried, the thing he was guarding felt less solid than he expected. "I don't know," he said finally. "Just myself." The old man's smile returned quiet and kind. "Then you are guarding a story," he said. The traveler looked up. "A story," he repeated. The old man gestured gently toward the open doorway. "An unlocked door does not invite trouble," he said. "It invites air." The traveler listened, unsure how something so simple could feel so true. The old man continued. "When you close everything tightly," he said, "the room becomes stale. The air grows heavy. Even if nothing enters, you feel trapped inside your own protection." The traveler sat still, noticing the air passing through the open doorway, cool against his skin, quiet, unthreatening. "And if I leave it open?" he asked. The old man's eyes remained calm. "Then things will come and go," he said, "as they always have." The traveler thought of his mind at night, thoughts entering, thoughts leaving, fears arriving like strangers at the door, memories stepping inside without permission. He swallowed his throat dry. "I don't know if I can do that," he admitted. "It feels unsafe." The old man nodded. "It feels unsafe because you have practiced guarding," he said, "not because guarding is required." He sat quietly for a moment, and the room seemed to quiet with him. Not silent, just unburdened. "Tonight," the old man said, "do not force the door open wider. Do not force it closed." The traveler listened. "Simply notice," the old man continued, "what happens when you stop standing in the doorway." The traveler felt a slow breath move through him. Outside, the night deepened. Inside, the light remained warm. The door stayed open, unchanged. That night, the traveler did not go far. He found a quiet place near the edge of the village where he could still see the old man's door from a distance, a thin, steady line of light against the dark. He lay down beneath a tree, feeling the ground support his weight. The air was cooler now. The village was quiet, but not dead. Somewhere a dog shifted in sleep. A window closed softly. A faint footstep passed and then disappeared. The traveler closed his eyes. Almost immediately, his mind did what it always did at night. A thought appeared, then another. A question asked to be answered. A memory asked to be checked. A fear tried to step forward as if it owned the night. Normally, he would react. He would tighten. He would brace. He would reach for control. Tonight, he remembered the open door. Not as a concept, as an image, a doorway, remaining slightly open without panic. He noticed his mind hovering at the threshold, ready to slam shut or swing wide. He did neither. He let it remain. Thoughts came and went, like air passing through a room. One thought entered. What if something happens? It lingered briefly, then moved on. Another thought followed. What if I lose myself? It softened, then faded. The traveler noticed his body. His shoulders were slightly raised, as if prepared to defend. He let them drop a little. His jaw was tight. He allowed it to loosen. Breath moved slowly, quietly, without instruction. The night did not press him. It did not demand solutions. It did not require a locked door. He felt a strange relief, not dramatic, not sudden. Just a quiet sense that he did not need to patrol his own mind. And as he stopped guarding, something else became clear. The thoughts did not become more dangerous. They became less convincing. Without resistance, they had nothing to push against. Without attention, they had nowhere to settle. The traveler lay still, letting the mind remain open, neither inviting nor rejecting. Just open. There was no single moment when sleep began. No switch flipped, no announcement. Only a gradual drifting. The darkness behind his eyelids felt softer now, less like a space that needed to be controlled. The body grew heavier in the most natural way, as if gravity itself had become kinder. Thoughts continued to appear, but they no longer formed a line. They were scattered. A word, a face, a half-formed idea. Each one entered, paused briefly, then passed through. Like air moving through an open room. There was nothing to hold, nothing to protect, nothing to complete. Breath deepened, the edges of awareness softened. The need to define anything, self-safety meaning, quietly dissolved, and the traveler rested. Not because the night was perfectly safe, not because the world promised him anything, but because he stopped standing guard at the door. When morning arrived, it did not feel like a return. It felt like continuation. Light crept into the sky. The village stirred slowly. Birds called out briefly, then fell silent. The traveler sat up, surprised by how ordinary his body felt. No crisis, no loss, no evidence that the open door had harmed him. He looked toward the house with the open doorway. The old man was there again, seated as before, the same calm posture, the same quiet presence. The door was still slightly open. Nothing had been taken. Nothing had been added. And the traveler realized gently that this was the lesson. Rest is not created by locking the world out. Sometimes rest begins the moment you stop locking yourself in. Morning moved through the village slowly, as if it did not want to disturb anyone. Light touched rooftops first, then the ground, then the edges of doorways. The air was cool and clean, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke and damp earth. People began their day without urgency. One window opening a broom, brushing dust from stone, a kettle warming somewhere unseen. The traveler woke beneath the tree where he had rested. For a moment he stayed still, noticing how his body felt. There was no sharp alertness in his chest, no immediate need to check himself to confirm who he was, to gather control before the day began. His mind was quiet, not empty but unbothered. He sat up and looked toward the house with the slightly open door. It was still open, just enough to let a line of light fall across the ground, unchanged from the night before. The traveler rose and walked slowly toward it. Inside, the old man sat as he had before, on the same low stool, hands resting loosely on his knees. The room looked exactly the same. No signs of disturbance, no signs of protection. The open door did not look careless. It looked natural. The old man glanced at the traveler with calm recognition. "You slept," he said softly. "Yes," the traveler replied. "More than I expected." The old man nodded as if the result required no surprise. The traveler sat again near the threshold. I kept thinking he admitted that if I left my mind open, something would come in and stay. Something dangerous. Something that would pull me awake. The old man's expression remained gentle. "And did it?" he asked. The traveler paused. "No," he said slowly. "Thoughts came, but they left." The old man smiled faintly. "Air comes in," he said. "Air goes out. The room remains." The traveler felt the words settle into his body like warmth. But sometimes the traveler said the room feels like it isn't enough. Sometimes it feels like I need walls stronger locks. The old man nodded. "Yes," he said. "When fear visits, we want certainty. We want an agreement with the world. He lifted a hand and gestured lightly toward the open door. But the world does not sign agreements, he continued. It only passes through. The traveler stared at the line between inside and outside. I've spent so much of my life guarding, he said, as if I were responsible for preventing change. The old man's voice softened even further. Guarding is exhausting, he said, because it asks you to do something impossible. The traveler looked up. What's impossible? He asked. To keep the wind from moving, the old man replied. Outside, a faint breeze passed, barely stirring the air. The traveler understood. He had been trying to keep his inner world still in the way one might try to stop the weather. The old man continued. The mind was not built to stay closed, he said. It was built to move, to open, to respond, to breathe. The traveler's shoulders loosened without him deciding to loosen them. And if I open it, he asked, what if something painful comes in? The old man nodded, not dismissing the fear. Pain will come, he said, and then it will go. He paused. The suffering happens when you trap it inside, he added, when you close the door behind it and call it your identity. The traveler felt a quiet chill at the truth in that sentence. So many nights he had closed the door on a single thought and then lived with it as if it belonged to him. The old man's eyes were steady. Today, he said, walk through the village with your mind as you would walk through this doorway. The traveler listened, not forcing it open. The old man continued, not forcing it shut. Just noticing, the traveler asked. The old man nodded. Just noticing. The traveler did as he was told, though the word told felt too strong for what had happened. He walked slowly through the village. He watched doors open and close. Some remained closed. Some stood wide open. Some were slightly ajar, letting air pass through without making a statement. He noticed that no door was permanent. People moved in and out. Life passed, and the village remained. As he walked, thoughts appeared. Small judgments, small worries, small memories. He noticed them without tightening. They passed like villagers, passing along the road. Some close, some distant, none of them requiring him to follow. And for the first time, the traveler realized that this was what the old man meant. An open mind was not a vulnerable mind. It was simply a breathing mind. That night, the traveler rested again near the edge of the village. He chose a place where he could still see the old man's door, a thin line of warm light in the distance. Darkness settled slowly. The village grew quiet in layers. First voices faded, then movement. Then the subtle sounds of day became the softer sounds of night. The traveler lay down and closed his eyes. Almost immediately, the mind offered him its old invitation. Check yourself. Define yourself. Make sure everything is safe. The traveler noticed the impulse as clearly as he noticed the cool air on his skin. He did not obey it. He remembered the doorway, not as an idea, as a feeling. The feeling of not standing guard, the feeling of letting air pass through. A thought entered. What if I wake up anxious again? He noticed it. He did not close the door. The thought passed. Another entered. What if tomorrow is hard? He noticed it. He did not argue. It softened and faded. He noticed his body again. The chest rose and fell. The stomach relaxed. The muscles behind the eyes began to grow warm and heavy. The traveler understood something quietly. The mind was not becoming silent, but it was becoming less sticky. Thoughts did not cling when he did not cling back. The night continued. The door in the distance remained slightly open, and inside, the traveler something matched that. Openness, calm, quiet, unforced. Breath deepened without effort. The body settled into the ground, surrendering weight the way a stone settles into sand. Thoughts became thinner, not gone, just quieter. A phrase, a memory, a soft image. Each one passed through without leaving a mark. There was no need to remember, no need to interpret, no need to protect. The traveler stopped feeling like a guard. He started feeling like a room. A place where things could enter and leave without changing what the room was. The edges of awareness softened. The distance between waking and sleeping dissolved into a gentle blur, and rest arrived. Not as a victory, not as a decision, as a natural consequence of no longer standing in the doorway. When morning returned, it did so quietly. The traveler opened his eyes to a sky already brightening. He sat up slowly, noticing how ordinary everything felt. No loss, no warning, no proof that the open mind had harmed him. Only breath, only ground, only the soft continuation of life. He walked once more towards the old man's house. The door was still slightly open. The old man sat as before, calm and present. The traveler bowed. "I think I understand," he said softly. The old man did not smile widely. He simply nodded as though understanding was not a destination, but a gentle habit. "Then take it with you," he said. How the traveler asked. The old man's gaze rested on the open doorway. "Do not carry it," he replied. "Just stop closing." The traveler bowed again and stepped back onto the road. The village faded behind him, and the quiet openness remained not as something to protect, but as something that could breathe. The road carried the traveler onward after he left the village of the open door. The land flattened again, stretching wide beneath a sky that seemed to grow larger with every step. There were fewer houses here, fewer signs of daily life. What remained was space, open, quiet, and gently indifferent to who passed through it. As evening approached, the traveler noticed a small structure set back from the road. It was a shrine, simple and unadorned, built of stone, worn smooth by time and weather. No offerings crowded its entrance. No symbols announced its purpose. It stood there as if it had always been part of the land, requiring no explanation. Inside, a single oil lamp burned. Its flame was small and steady, casting a soft circle of light against the stone walls. There was no glass protecting it, no barrier between flame and air, and yet it did not flicker wildly or strain against the darkness. A caretaker sat nearby. He was neither young nor old enough to be remarkable. His posture was relaxed, his eyes half closed, his attention resting lightly on the flame without fixing on it. He did not look like someone guarding the lamp. He looked like someone keeping it company. The traveler stepped closer. "You leave the lamp on," he said quietly. The caretaker nodded. "Yes." Even at night, the traveler asked. "Yes." Even when no one is here, the traveler continued. The caretaker's lips curved into a faint smile. "Especially then," he replied. The traveler sat on the cool stone floor, a short distance from the lamp. He watched the flame move gently, responding to subtle shifts in the air without fear. At night, the traveler said after a while, "I feel like I must turn everything off." The caretaker did not interrupt. "My thoughts," the traveler continued, "my feelings, my memories. If anything stays lit, I worry I won't be able to rest." The caretaker's gaze remained on the flame. "A flame does not disturb the darkness," he said softly. "It only rests within it." The words lingered. The traveler frowned slightly. "But doesn't light keep you awake?" he asked. "Doesn't it pull your attention?" The caretaker shook his head gently. "Only when you stare at it," he said. The traveler considered this. He thought of his nights, how a single thought could feel like a bright light demanding attention. How he would rush to extinguish it, afraid that if it remained, sleep would never come. "And if I don't turn it off?" the traveler asked. "What if it burns all night?" The caretaker finally looked at him. "Then it burns," he said simply. The traveler felt a quiet resistance rise in his chest. "But won't it use up all the oil?" he asked. The caretaker smiled faintly. "It has enough," he replied. The traveler looked back at the flame. It did not struggle. It did not hurry. It did not seem concerned about lasting. It simply burned. The caretaker stood and adjusted the wick slightly, not to make the flame brighter, but to keep it steady. His movements were slow, careful, without urgency. "Most people believe rest comes from darkness," he said. "They believe everything must be turned off, silenced, erased." The traveler nodded. That belief felt familiar. "But darkness does not require effort," the caretaker continued, "and light does not require fear." The traveler thought of the open door from the night before. Air passing through. Nothing taken, nothing lost. "I spend my nights trying to extinguish my mind," the traveler admitted. "And the more I try, the brighter everything feels." The caretaker returned to his seat. "Yes," he said, "because resistance feeds the flame." The traveler let out a slow breath. "So what should I do?" he asked. The caretaker's voice was gentle. "Leave one lamp on," he said. The traveler looked up. "Just one?" he asked. "Just one," the caretaker replied. "The one that appears on its own." The traveler felt something soften. He understood. Not every thought needed to be erased. Not every feeling needed to be shut down. Some could remain quietly, without being chased or fed. The caretaker gestured toward the open space of the shrine. "When you lie awake," he said, "do not try to make the mind completely dark." The traveler listened closely. "Let what remains remain," the caretaker continued, "and notice that darkness is still vast enough to hold it." The flame flickered gently, unchanged by the teaching. As night settled fully, the shrine grew quieter. The road outside faded into stillness. No travelers passed. No voices carried through the air. The world narrowed to the small circle of light and the surrounding darkness that accepted it without complaint. The caretaker remained seated. He did not watch the lamp closely. He did not worry about it. He trusted it. The traveler stayed as well, resting against the cool stone wall. He noticed how the light did not push the darkness away. It simply existed within it. For the first time, the traveler felt a different relationship with wakefulness. He did not feel hunted by it. He did not feel required to defeat it. It was simply present like the flame. That night, the traveler rested near the shrine. The lamp continued to burn its flame low and steady. The darkness around it felt deep, unthreatened, complete. The traveler lay down. Thoughts appeared almost immediately. A memory, a concern, a half-formed image of something unfinished. His instinct was to turn them off. He noticed that instinct and remembered the lamp. He allowed one thought to remain just one. He did not engage it. He did not chase it. He let it burn quietly, without feeding it with fear or resistance. The thought stayed for a moment. Then, without effort, it dimmed on its own. Another appeared briefly. He treated it the same way. The mind did not grow brighter. It grew calmer. He noticed his breathing slow. The chest loosened. The shoulders softened. The familiar tension behind the eyes began to melt. The traveler realized something quietly profound. It was not the presence of thought that kept him awake. It was the fight against it. The lamp burned. The darkness remained vast. The night grew deeper. The flame became softer in his awareness, no longer the center of attention. Darkness expanded gently around it, holding it without strain. Thoughts thinned. They did not vanish completely. They simply lost their urgency. A word, a sensation, a faint image. Each one glowed briefly, then faded back into the dark. There was no effort in letting this happen. No need to monitor, no need to correct. The body sank into the ground, supported fully. Breath moved quietly, evenly, without guidance. The traveler stopped trying to sleep, and rest arrived. Not because everything was turned off, but because nothing was being forced to go dark. When morning came, the shrine looked unchanged. The lamp was still burning its flame, steady, unexhausted. The caretaker sat nearby, eyes open, now peaceful. "You left it," the traveler said softly. "Yes," the caretaker replied. "And it didn't disturb the night," the traveler said. The caretaker smiled. "No," he said, "it rested within it." The traveler stood and bowed. He stepped back onto the road, carrying no rule, no instruction, only a gentle understanding. Rest does not require complete darkness. Sometimes it begins when you stop being afraid of the light that remains. Morning arrived gently at the shrine. Light crept across the stone floor, meeting the soft glow of the oil lamp without conflict. For a brief moment, flame and daylight shared the space together, neither overpowering the other. Then slowly, the lamp's presence became less noticeable, not extinguished, just no longer needed. The traveler woke nearby his body, still his breath deep and even. He noticed something immediately. There was no urgency in his waking, no instinct to scan his thoughts, no reflex to check whether something had gone wrong in the night. He sat up slowly and looked toward the lamp. It was still burning. Its flame was smaller now, quieter in the growing light, but steady. The caretaker sat nearby as he had the night before, his posture unchanged, his presence calm. "You slept," the caretaker said softly. "Yes," the traveler replied, "and I didn't feel the need to turn anything off." The caretaker nodded as if this were the most natural outcome. "Did anything remain?" he asked. The traveler thought for a moment. "Yes," he said. "A few thoughts, but they didn't disturb me." The caretaker smiled faintly. "Then they were only light," he said, "not fire." The traveler rose and stretched slowly, noticing how ordinary his body felt. There was no heaviness carried over from the night, no sense of having struggled or achieved anything. Just rest. They sat together in the quiet morning. Birds called briefly outside, then moved on. The air warmed gradually, touching the skin without insistence. "I've always believed," the traveler said, "that rest required silence, complete darkness, the absence of anything active." The caretaker listened without interruption, but when I tried to create that, the traveler continued, "I only made myself more alert, more afraid of whatever remained." The caretaker nodded. "When you fear light," he said, "even a spark feels overwhelming. The traveler looked at the lamp again. "It didn't ask for my attention," he said. "It didn't demand to be watched." "No," the caretaker replied. "It burned because it could." The traveler considered his own mind. How many nights, he wondered aloud, had he spent fighting a single thought, turning it into something far brighter than it ever needed to be. The caretaker seemed to sense the question beneath the words. "Thoughts do not need to be extinguished," he said. "They need to be unguarded." The traveler felt the truth of that settle into his chest. Later that day, the traveler walked slowly around the shrine. The land nearby was quiet, open, unadorned. The shrine did not stand apart from it. It blended naturally, as though it had grown from the ground rather than been built upon it. He noticed how the lamp, now barely visible in the daylight, still burned quietly inside. No one rushed to turn it off. No one worried about wasting oil. The caretaker trusted the balance. As the traveler walked, thoughts appeared. Simple observations, passing memories, small reflections. He noticed them. He did not try to push them away. He did not invite them to stay. They moved through him easily, like the breeze moving through open land. That evening, the traveler rested once more near the shrine. The sun lowered slowly, and the world dimmed in layers. Shadows lengthened, colors softened. The day released its hold without resistance. Inside the shrine, the lamp grew visible again. The caretaker did not adjust it. He did not check it. He simply sat nearby. The traveler lay down on the cool stone floor, feeling the ground support him fully. Thoughts appeared as night returned. A concern about the road ahead. A memory from long ago. A faint question with no clear shape. He noticed the familiar urge to extinguish them, and chose not to. He let one remain, just one. He did not stare at it. He did not follow it. He let it burn quietly in the background of awareness. The thought softened, then dimmed. Another appeared briefly. He treated it the same way. The mind did not grow brighter. It grew calmer. Breath slowed naturally. Muscles released their quiet holding. The traveler felt something he had not felt in a long time. Permission. The night deepened. The flame's presence faded into the background of awareness, no longer distinct, no longer central. Darkness held it effortlessly vast enough to include both light and shadow. Thoughts thinned further. They no longer arrived as questions. They arrived as impressions, a feeling, a color, a brief sensation. Each one glowed faintly, then dissolved. The body sank into rest without instruction. The boundary between waking and sleeping softened until it no longer mattered. The traveler did not try to sleep, and sleep came, not as absence, not as escape, but as quiet continuity. Before dawn, the traveler stirred slightly. There was no thought attached to the movement. He shifted, then settled again, his body finding comfort on its own. Rest continued. When morning returned, the lamp was still burning. Its flame was low now, having used some oil but not exhausted. The caretaker sat nearby, peaceful, untroubled. "You could turn it off now," the traveler said gently. The caretaker smiled. "It will go out when it is ready," he replied. The traveler bowed. He stepped outside the morning air, cool and clear. As he walked back toward the road, he noticed something subtle. Thoughts still appeared, but they no longer frightened him. They were like small lamps, brief, gentle, easily held by the vastness around them. And the traveler understood. Without needing to put it into words, rest does not come from forcing the mind into darkness. Sometimes it comes from trusting the light to fade on its own. The road no longer felt like a path leading somewhere. It was simply ground beneath the traveler's feet, appearing where each step landed, then disappearing behind him without leaving a trace. The sense of progress had softened into something quieter, movement without direction, presence without purpose. As evening approached, the land opened into a wide, empty plain. No trees marked the horizon. No buildings broke the line of the sky. Nothing stood out enough to be named. The traveler slowed, then stopped. Not because he was tired, not because he was searching. Stopping simply happened. He stood for a moment, feeling the air move gently across his skin, then lay down on the open ground. There was no shelter here, no boundary to create inside and outside. The sky stretched fully above him, wide and indifferent. For a long while, nothing occurred. Thoughts did not rush in. Feelings did not announce themselves. There was only the body resting, only breath arriving and leaving, only the steady presence of night. He noticed something quietly surprising. There was no desire for the night to end, no wish for sleep to arrive, no fear of remaining awake. The absence of wanting felt complete. Earlier in his journey, this emptiness would have unsettled him. He would have searched for meaning, looked for instruction, wondered what he was supposed to do next. Now none of that arose. The mind remained open, spacious, unoccupied. Thoughts appeared occasionally, soft, incomplete, without urgency. They did not gather into stories. They did not linger long enough to be followed. Each one dissolved naturally, leaving the space unchanged. As darkness deepened, the plain held its quiet shape. The sky grew darker, then softened again as stars appeared scattered without pattern. The air cooled gradually, touching the body lightly without demand. The traveler noticed his breath moving steadily. In, out. No effort guided it. No awareness needed to follow it. The body settled more deeply into the ground, releasing subtle tension that had once felt permanent. Muscles softened. The space behind the eyes grew heavy and warm. There was no sense of time passing. Moments blended gently into one another without edge or separation. The mind no longer measured wakefulness against sleep. Nothing asked him to rest. Rest arrived because nothing remained in the way. There was no moment when awareness faded. No point of crossing. No shift to observe. Only drifting. The feeling of the ground beneath the body. The quiet darkness behind closed eyes. The steady continuation of breath, moving on its own. No watcher remained. No effort remained. The sense of being someone dissolved gently, not into nothing but into simplicity. The night held everything without distinction, and within that holding rest, deepened naturally. Before dawn, the traveler stirred briefly. There was no thought attached to the movement. He turned slightly, then settled again the way the body adjusts itself without instruction. Sleep resumed without interruption. When morning arrived, it did so quietly. Light touched the plain without ceremony. The sky looked exactly as it had before, wide open, unchanged by the night. The traveler rose slowly. There was no sense of arrival, no feeling of completion, and yet nothing felt unfinished. As he took his first steps forward, the understanding moved with him effortlessly. There was never a final destination. There was never something to achieve. Rest had always been present, waiting for nothing at all. The plane remained quiet as night continued. Nothing shifted to mark the passing of time. The sky held its depth without effort. The ground stayed firm and patient beneath the traveler's body, offering support without asking anything in return. He rested there, not waiting for sleep, not resisting wakefulness, just resting. Thoughts appeared only faintly now, like distant echoes that never quite arrived. They had lost their urgency, their shape, their need to be understood. Each one softened before becoming whole, dissolving back into the quiet from which it arose. The body felt heavy in a gentle way, not weighed down, not pulled under, simply at ease. Breath moved slowly, evenly, without guidance. Each inhale arrived on its own. Each exhale released without effort. There was nothing to manage, nothing to improve. The night held everything. As the hours passed, the sense of night itself began to thin. There was no clear separation between moments anymore. No sense of before or after. Only a continuous softness, like still water extending in every direction. The traveler noticed how awareness no longer centered on the body. Sensations blurred gently. Edges softened. The distinction between inside and outside faded. There was no watcher remaining, no one waiting for rest, no one checking whether sleep had arrived. And yet, rest deepened, not as an event, not as a transition, but as a quiet unfolding that did not need to be noticed to continue. The night did not move toward morning. It simply remained. There was no final letting go, only drifting. The darkness behind closed eyes, the steady continuation of breath, the quiet sense of being held without boundary. No effort, no direction, no need to remain. The mind rested because it was no longer being asked to do anything. The body rested because it was allowed to. When light eventually returned, it did so gently, not as an interruption, not as an ending. Morning touched the plane without changing it. The sky looked the same as it always had, wide open, complete. The traveler rose slowly. There was no feeling of arrival, no sense of accomplishment, and yet nothing felt incomplete. The road remained. The sky remained. Rest remained. As this long night continues, there is nothing more you need to do. If you are still awake, allow the quiet to remain with you. If sleep has already found you, let it deepen naturally. This gentle journey through the night has been shared with you by The Long Night, a place for stillness, for rest, and for letting go without effort. May your mind soften, may your body feel safe, and may sleep come to you easily in its own time. Good night.